Good afternoon. Welcome to the scheduled Budget Committee hearing of May 16th, 2019. I'm Councilmember Lene Palmisano. I chair this Budget Committee. With me here at the dais are Council Members Cunningham, Schrader, Bender, Fletcher, and Reich. We do anticipate a few more on their way in, specifically Council Vice President Jenkins, Goodman, and Warsami are all just going to be here momentarily. On our agenda today, we have a packed agenda. I'm hoping we will get through it, but we'll be doing the results Minneapolis departmental reports from police, then the city attorney's office, then public works, the city assessor, and then the fire department. So thank you for being here with us. We do have the mayor's office is present. Mayor Fry will be here shortly as well. However, let's just go right ahead and get started. We're going to start with the police presentation, and it might take a couple minutes to load up on the computer, but welcome, Chief Arredondo. If in the meantime you want to tell us who's joined you here today.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Palmisano, council members. Happy to be joined this afternoon with our team. We have Manager Kim McDonald, amazing partner in the unit, Mr. Dan Booty, and of course our wonderful Director of Finance, Ms. Robin Mcpherson. So,
thank you. For my colleagues, I'll let you know that we do have speaker management up and running, or I'll also keep an eye out for people's flags. And if it's all right with you, Chief, I think you're pretty comfortable taking questions as they might come up within your presentation as well as at the end. Super.
Chair Palmisano,
Yeah.
that sounds good.
Okay, thanks.
Just before I start, if you would indulge me just for a minute, I just wanted to recognize that this is National Police Week. Back in 1962, President John F. Kennedy marked this week to really bring honor and tribute to those men and women who serve as peace officers across our nation, specifically for those who have lost their lives, men and women in the line of duty serving their communities. And so this also is an opportunity every year for our precincts to have open houses, and I know that all of you are aware of that, and it's a great way for us to connect with our community. So I just wanted to name that. So. Chair Palmisano, committee members, happy to be before you with my team and present our Minneapolis Police Department results for the city enterprise. And we'll start off with looking at our performance summary. And the slide that you are all looking at is broken down into a couple of different organizational units. You will see that public safety services, which makes up the really primary responsibility of the Minneapolis Police Department, making sure that we're providing security and safety and engaging with our communities, primarily through a 911 response and patrol officers. And happy to report that last year, when we measure violent crime in our city of Minneapolis, our Part 1 violent crimes were actually down last year compared to the previous year. That is obviously very important. The less victims that we have in Minneapolis who are victims of crime, that is something that we certainly have all taken an oath to do. And so we want to continue to make sure that our communities are safe. We also understand that these are not just numbers, that these are human lives, and so the more that we can do to safeguard, protect, and prevent these types of occurrences is very important indeed. We also have a operational unit that encompasses our investigations and forensics teams, one of the other key pieces is we've been obviously monitoring the interactions that we have with our juveniles and their relationships within our communities as it relates to crime and public safety. Minneapolis, as well as cities across this country, have seen a gradual decrease in offenses and arrests by juveniles, and we hope that we continue in that trend. But we saw several instances where juveniles were less involved in some of the crimes that we had seen them in years past. And so we think that there's a robust outreach with our schools. We're also trying to do a lot of outreach, and whether it's our SROs, whether it's our community engagement. And so we want to continue to see decreases in that. we work closely and support diversion for our young people. And so we're hoping that while there was a decrease in juveniles offered diversion, we also know that there were less juveniles in the system, and so we'll continue to monitor that. I know that there's also been specific modeling of diversion looking at some communities of color and how to best communicate and offer diversion, from everything from making sure that families are receiving text messages to get to court on time through mobile text messaging and other types of things, to make sure that we're really doing all that we can to offer the best ways to divert young people and make sure that we're doing it in a way that is respectful and sensitive to those families and their needs. So we continue to hope to see a downward trend in juveniles being involved in the criminal justice system. So, without any questions, the next slide that we're looking at deals with our, we call it our special operations and intelligence. These are the men and women who primarily are focused on high-risk types of search warrants in our communities. The biggest important thing here to note on this slide is that because that involves usually the presence of weapons, or weapons being said that they're probably being involved in this type of case or incident, creates a high risk. But the biggest thing to take away from here is that 97% of those high-risk warrants that we saw for the 2018 year did not result in any injuries to our community members or the officers in that unit. Safety to our community members and our officers will continue to be a priority with those. The other piece I wanted to just note, community and collaborative engagement. We talk about the encounters that we have in terms of a limited, dealing with or encountering individuals with limited English proficiency, but more importantly, number 2, incidents involving emotionally disturbed persons. That specifically indicates a call where the EDP label had been used. However, I just want to note, and while there was a decrease in that, I just want to note that that does not encompass many in our community, unfortunately, who are dealing with mental health, trauma, and other wellness issues. And so we're very happy through your support to help support our co-responder model, because those folks are also proactively dealing with individuals within our community who are suffering in other areas that may not call themselves out as an EDP. So we want to also continue to be mindful of that presence in our community.
Chief, question or comment from Councilmember Schrader?
Thanks, Chair Palmisano. Just a quick question on the special operations and intelligence. I see that the number of bomb squad sweeps conducted has decreased, and that's a bad thing? Well, on the red, so I just didn't know how to take that.
Yeah, Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Schrader. Sometimes, Councilmember Schrader, that's going to fluctuate. It could depend on, we also get sometimes requests from different agencies. Sometimes that could mean, for example, if you get a Super Bowl or a Final Four, it can fluctuate at times. But a decrease in that, I don't necessarily know if that's a bad thing, but we certainly are mindful. I will also say that part of what that team does that's not entailed in the bomb sweeps is suspicious package response too, which is a little bit separate from that. So we continue to monitor that.
Thank you.
Yeah. The next slide, obviously very important to the Minneapolis Police Department to ensure that we are doing all that we can to have a diverse workforce. This also obviously through our city leadership is very important in terms of how we continue to look at ways to diversifying all of our enterprise departments. As you can see from the 2 key focus slides, people of color in the workforce within the Minneapolis Police Department and women within the workforce. People of color over the years, we're trending obviously in the right direction. Still more work needs to be done in that area. And also the women in policing, and certainly women in policing and within the Minneapolis Police Department, that continues to be a very focused, intentional area we're looking at from recruitment and hiring. I will say that Minneapolis, along with other departments across the state of Minnesota and across the country, are seeing some challenges in that. As chief, I'm really reaching out and trying to get feedback, and we have a group of our women leadership that are meeting to focus on areas from hiring, recruitment, professional development, and retention. But these are areas we're going to continue to try to focus on. Obviously, we do better when our workforce reflects the diversity in our city, and continuing to have women leadership joining the ranks is very important, and we will continue to focus on that. Department priorities on this next slide here. Want to bring attention that when I took over as chief, our umbrella and our pillars are based on trust, accountability, and professional service. One of the key focus points in that has to be our MPD leadership. Culturally, as an organization, we had never been very intentional and being very specific and strategic in terms of the leadership of our supervisors. It was pretty much an OJP, learn on the job while you go, and that can have some devastating consequences down the road. So we started back in 2017, December of 2017, we created this MPD Leadership and Professional Development course. Right now, we're happy to have Commander Katie Blackwell, who's leading that. And this is 80 hours of getting our men and women who have being promoted in a core key supervision group as sergeants, because they have the most proximate impact with those officers out there, and really making sure we're very structured in terms of the things that we're trying to teach them, what a good supervisor should be in terms of representing the MPD. This is, again, a major paradigm shift in our MPD culture. It's structured and formalized leadership training and professional development, and it's also building that legacy of leadership for those men and women who are going to be serving here for the next 15, 20 years in their career. Very important to have that leadership in place. And so, and we're seeing great results from that. We've got some wonderful supervisors that we've promoted over the last couple of years, and it's paying off in big dividends in terms of their relationships with the officers as well as with their communities. The next big piece, as we talk about public safety and reducing harm in our communities, the Group Violence Intervention, or GVI, as many of you know, is helping to, through a collaborative effort, is helping to reduce harm in our communities, decrease gun violence in our communities, and really reaching out to offer particularly young Black and brown men who've been involved in some of our groups resources that they need to really change and turn their lives around. The GVI framework model is really keeping our young men safe, free, and alive, and through offering them hope and services that they may need. We're happy to also have City Enterprise partner, Ms. Sasha Cotton, who is doing a phenomenal job of leading that effort. We also have some great credible messengers within the community who are part of that as well. And we can see from just 2018, the stats for GVI in Minneapolis, they had an intake of over 100 individuals. And what I'd also like to say is, as we monitor these groups and some of the violence in our city, what we can't quantify is the number of shootings and homicides that did not occur because of the great work of GVI. Next step over at both our HCMC hospitals in North Memorial, and the focused intelligence gathering work of our GET teams. And so I think that has absolutely been a core piece in helping us to reduce some of the gun violence that we've seen in our city. The next slide, as we look at public safety services, as we talk about violent crimes that we've experienced over the last 5-year chart here, you'll see from 2018 last year to 2017, there were 827 less victims of violent crime. Again, these are, while there are numbers based on here, these are individuals who, fortunately, 827 were less impacted by violence in our city. With that, I will still say that domestic assault still to be a significant driver in our crime here in the city, domestic assaults and intimate partner violence, and we continue to work very closely with our social service partners. We've been very fortunate to have assistance from the county attorney's office with embedded advocates in our sexual assault teams, and hoping to continue that. One of the things that this chart does not talk about or does not indicate or show here, but I do think it's important to mention that 2018, the Minneapolis Police Department saw a 300% increase in overdose in heroin. And what that equated to as well is Minneapolis police officers spent calendar days, 34 days last year alone, just responding to overdoses. So it is still it's an epidemic here in our city and across the nation. We started to outfit all of our officers from 2018 on with Narcan. I actually carry Narcan in my vehicle as well, but it's something that we are trying to pay attention, work with folks, but that doesn't indicate the prevalence of Narcan, or excuse me, the prevalence of the overdoses of heroin and opioids in our community.
Chief, if I could stop you or pause you here and call on Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Chief. If it's possible, can we go back one slide?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, absolutely.
I can feel the pain of Councilmember Palmisano, who sits over here in this in the corner over here. So, so thank you, Chief. I really am passionate about the work that GVI does, and the role that MPD plays is so critical in that, because without the swift enforcement, the follow through of if you do this, then these are the consequences that follow, then the whole program falls through. So I'm curious if you could please explain the connection between how the GET unit is gathering intelligence, how that intelligence is then being passed on to, let's say, the 4th Precinct, and how then are those actions being carried out?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, and thank you for highlighting that. So the GET team receives their intelligence through a couple of different ways. I should also note that they work very closely with Hennepin County Probation. Hennepin County Probation is very important in this. Some of the young boys and men who are involved in these groups are currently on probation, so they will keep in contact with them if there's any violations that occur. Some of that information is through our intelligence over at the Strategic Information Center. If we have an incident of violence that occurs and witnesses are naming people who were there, groups, members who were there, that is certainly a key piece of how that information is gathered. I will say that social media tends to be a very important piece in terms of how some of these group members communicate, not only amongst each other, but communicate and share sometimes what some of their offenses, what they've done. And it's very public and outward facing, and so that is another key indicator, as well as community members. We have credible messengers who are working within GVI, who will hear perhaps a young group member say, I don't care, I'm going to retaliate, and that information is passed along to our GET members to try to prevent that as well. Councilmember Cunningham, you talked about also an enforcement message, and we communicate that to them as well. Primarily, formally in the call-in, there's a call-in that occurs where we have these young men who sit down, and we tell them, we do not want another funeral, we do not want to send you to prison, but we must keep our city safe. And if you or your group are involved in the next shooting or homicide or significant act of violence, we will bring everything to bear on you, whether that's the MPD, county attorney's office, and even our United States Attorney's office. But we have to keep our community safe. If there's services that you need, GED, housing, these types of things, we'll provide that, but we have to keep our community safe. Inspector Pulfus of the 4th Precinct is in contact with our GET team, Lieutenant St. George, on a constant basis, and we're making sure that he has that information timely and necessary to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I can have a follow-up. Thank you so much for that robust explanation. My follow-up question would be then, so let's say, like, I just had a homicide in my ward, I think it was 2 days ago now, unfortunately a juvenile, and so how then how fast is the turnaround time from knowing whether or not that juvenile was gang or clique involved, and if that shooting was gang or clique involved, and then when an enforcement would start?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham. First answer is it depends, but oftentimes one of the first things we're doing is looking for any sort of group involvement, and one of the reasons for that is to counteract any sense of retaliation that could occur. So that's very important. What we also do in terms of sifting through that intelligence information is looking at who might have been with the person, because even if the decedent was not involved in a group, but was with other group members, that can tell a story as well. And so we have our folks who are processing that information, right after it happens. One of the key process things that we do in terms of investigating those acts of violence is who could be the next potential person who's going to suffer from the violence. And so that is all part of that investigative process. And so that happens pretty timely. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to to give the example of the red tape gang from last year. Like, there was just like a very clear result that happened out of it. They were wreaking havoc in the community, both in North and Northeast and downtown. Like, there was a small group of them. And then from my understanding, it was like as soon as they were identified as a part of this particular gang, and they knew that they were involved with a homicide, that there were like two folks in particular who kept getting pulled over, and each time that they got pulled over, they got another felony gun charge, and then they racked up like 6 or 7 within a few weeks, and so they ended up going away for a long time. Other folks were able to get support through GVI to leave the city because they were in such danger, they were in grave danger, that they needed to leave, and so they got the support that they needed to leave, and now we don't have an issue with that gang anymore. And so so I just really want to say, thank you for the work that you do, as well as the critical importance of the follow-through of the enforcement action, and I think the timeliness of it, and whatever that can be done to expedite that information sharing, to know like the highs, the lows, where is it coming from, who is it going to, like that is what's really going to put the teeth behind it, because we have those credible folks out in the community who are doing amazing work. I mean, story after story after story of a person who, just give a shout out to Ferome. He talks about how many times at 3 a.m. he'll have somebody call and be like, I'm gonna go kill this person. Like, I'm done, I'm gonna go handle business. And he talks them off the ledge. He goes and picks them up, drives them around, cools them off. And that's not necessarily quantified here. So I also just want to name that. And those folks are really carrying a big, heavy burden. And so just to make sure that when we think about all three, between the social services, the community folks, and also law enforcement, that we really have all three really tightly working together. So just wanted to say thank you, and also that we really want to lean into that component of it as well, because that's really where the teeth live. So thank you.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, I absolutely agree with you. And that enforcement piece is very critical to sending that message, and data plays a very important role in making sure that we're getting it right. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Mayor Fry, for joining us. And I don't know that I see others here yet. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and thank you, Chief. Looking at the stats on 6 and 7, it tells a couple of stories that I think are relevant. One is that we are seeing some positive trends in overall crime, which is good, that overall Part 1 crimes are down. But one thing that I'm less sure about, if I'm understanding the numbers right, is that the ratio of Part 1 crime arrests to Part 1 crimes is also going down. It seems like we're solving a lower percentage of the crimes that are being committed. If you look at a really significant drop from 1,800 to less than 1,200 arrests made. So do you have a theory about why we seem to be solving fewer of the Part 1 crimes, or fewer of the Part 1 crimes seem to be resulting in arrests?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher. Don't have a real handle on that as of yet. But if I had to speculate, and anecdotally, I think sometimes it may come down to also that in some of these cases, and I look at some of the units that are specifically here, the assault unit, robbery unit, sometimes that may do with caseload as well. And if the investigators are not, they don't have the time to really look into those cases, some of those things may not result in a charge going over to the county attorney's office as well. But again, that's speculative at this point. Yeah.
If I may follow up. That seems like something worth looking into, because I think I would expect that if the crime numbers went down, which indicates some overall successful strategies, if the numbers went down, that would reduce the caseload and hopefully even help us solve a higher percentage of the crimes that were coming in, would be intuitively what I would think would happen. So I'm curious to figure out where the disconnect is.
Chair Palmisano, thank you, Councilmember Fletcher, and we'll look into that.
Is it, if I may, is it possible that there's other diversions, that we're not arresting them, but there's other diversions being used as well?
Chair Palmisano, that is correct. The county does have some different diversions that are taking place for some offenses, and so that could possibly play into that as well.
Okay, I had that same question on property crime, so thank you.
Yes. So this next slide looks at the property crimes in our city over the span of the 5 years. Again, very happy to report that there were 2,364 less victims of property crime offenses, and that's from 2018, 2017. We were seeing trends in that in both our violent crime and our property crimes. That's a really good thing. I can remember just several years ago, theft from motor vehicles were just significantly high in our burglaries, but through our works, I think our neighborhood block associations do a great work in getting crime prevention messaging out. We look towards and lean towards our CPSs, our crime prevention specialists in the precincts, and so want to continue to keep trending in that direction. These next slide focuses on our number of MPD calls and calls for service through 911, both from self-initiated calls and and citizens calling in to 911. I just also want to note that back in 2017, I believe we started, or MECC started with a new ProQA, a new software in terms of a new formalized way in terms of how they're dispatching and gathering information from 911 callers. The second bar graph slide there, the average MPD response time to calls that came through 911, priority 2 are pretty much the primary route of prioritization for dispatch 911 calls. For priority 1 calls, we did see a slight increase of 26.2 seconds in priority 1 calls, and just for awareness, priority 1 calls would be those very important, I need a police officer or a police response there right away. But priority 2 calls pretty much stayed within the same time frame. Number of 911 calls and self-initiated calls, that third graph, there were 37,000 less self-initiated calls or 911 calls between the 2018 comparing to 2017. As we look at incidents,
If I may pause you there, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I guess I'm curious why, because it looks like the number of 911 calls was down or slightly or flat. So why were response times up? Chair
Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher, I think there's probably some other factors that may indicate or go into that. So, for example, as I indicated earlier, we saw a 300% increase in the heroin overdoses. That requires a lot of time our officers are spending, which will draw resources from a certain precinct. And so we're also asking our officers to try to be more intentional on spending more time at calls to give that service that they need. So those are some things that I do believe that factor into that. Yeah.
If I may, Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, could you just explain the differences? So you said priority one obviously is like we need somebody right now. Could you talk about what would fall within priority 2 and 3 as well?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham. Yes, a priority 2 might be intimate partner violence recently occurred. The subject of that is no longer on scene, but there's a need to get a squad out there right away, maybe to check for injuries or what have you. That would be more of a priority 2 scenario. Priority 3 could be residents came home from a vacation, realized that their house was broken into, don't believe it happened anytime soon. There's no fear or sense of a subject on scene, but really are just seeking a police report to document that the break-in did occur. So timeliness of being urgent is not a factor in consideration. And so that would be more priority 3, if that helps.
Great. And is that communicated to folks as they call, like the level of urgency? So like, oh, it might take some time. Like, I'm just curious, is like if those like level of priorities are communicated to folks to manage their expectations about when an officer will arrive.
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Cunningham. I hate to speak out of turn and for another enterprise MECC,
That is fair, yes.
but I my assumption is they may not tell the caller yours is a priority 1 or yours is priority 2, but I think there's probably some communication on when they could expect to see a squad response. If that's helpful.
Yeah, and the last thing I would ask, is it possible to get this information about response time disaggregated by precinct?
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Cunningham. That is correct. It is.
Okay,
I'm leaning over to Director Mcpherson because we do categorize it by precinct.
great. I would love to be able to see that data if possible. Thank you.
Chief, I don't remember when, I think it was last year, at the end of last year, but there was a work group that was formed at a staff direction by Councilmember Johnson, who isn't here. And I know it has an open call for community members right now. And is it to explore the question of response times and how we might mitigate that? And can you give us any sort of status update or what you might be thinking for that work group?
Chair Palmisano, yes, to your question, I know that committee has been formed. I certainly want to make sure that MPD is represented on that committee. The focus for that was really to look at what are the types of calls that MECC is receiving that don't necessarily require an MPD response, and we're eager to be a part of that. Again, I don't believe that has started just yet.
That's right. Thank you.
Yeah. This current slide here looks at 3 categories: incidents of gunfire in our city, discharge casings recovered, and victim of gunshot wounds. I will again say that when you look at from 2017 to 2018, the reduction in incidents involving gunfire, which 1,816 is still way too many for our city, but I will say that reduction is part and parcel because of the very focused, intentional good work of our GVI, our Next Step, and our GET teams. The next slide, discharge casings recovered. This is also very important from a forensic standpoint because even after a shooting has occurred, it's important for our forensics teams to go out there and collect all shell casings, and we recover all shell casings, and we run them through a system called NIBIN, which looks to identify where weapons may have been used in previous similar shootings or occurrences. And so you see that we've recovered just in 2018 alone over 2,500 shell casings or discharge casings in our city. These discharge casings being recovered has helped to hold folks accountable in our city who've committed these crimes. And of course, victims of gunshot wounds last year reported 244 people that were actually impacted, wounded, and injured by gunshots. So very important, again, the important work of our GVI teams and GET teams to help reduce our community members from being wounded by gunfire.
I want to just point out we've been joined by Council Members Goodman and Warsami, so thank you.
This slide here that looks at our juvenile cases reviewed for diversion, again, shows a decrease from year 2018 to 2017. We're seeing less juveniles committing these offenses and being arrested and going through that system, but we still are offering, making sure that we're offering diversion for our juveniles. And if you can see, the next slide looks at the percentage of juveniles that were offered diversion in 2018 compared to those that were not offered diversion. And again, some of the juveniles did not either qualify for diversion, meaning they did not meet the legal sufficiency, or there were other factors that played into that. But our goal is any time that we get a juvenile who may have committed an offense that qualifies, we want to make sure that we do offer them the opportunity for diversion depending upon the situation there. This slide just shows the juvenile cases submitted to the county for charging. And over the last 5 years, we've seen a reduction in the number of cases going to the county attorney's office for charging for juveniles. The previous slide, I should say that charging for juveniles continues to decrease by 10% over the last 5 years. When we look at the adult cases submitted to the county for charging, these are felony, always, or gross misdemeanor cases. It has stayed pretty much the same. Now, not all cases submitted result in charging or charges. And we see 80% of those cases submitted to the county were charged, but we do have a percentage that are declined, or we get a declination charge over at the county attorney's office. So it's a slide there. When we look at the number of police employee injuries, and we're certainly, again, another paradigm culture shift in our department is employee wellness. When we look at the number of officers injured over the several years, we see from 2018 150, but just even a couple of years ago in 2016, that number was 173. We also know that less use of force equates to less employee injuries, obviously less community injuries, lost time from work. There's a lot of factors that go into that category. That bar graph primarily focuses on physical injuries, but we know that our employees can also suffer mental wellness as a result from that, and mental wellness challenges from that. And so we're happy that we've got some structured wellness opportunities now in place for our employees, and we'll continue to do that. When we look at number of overtime hours worked.
Wait, Chief,
Yep.
if I may. So these are employee physical injuries. This wouldn't encompass people who are out and need to do like after a critical incident and need to do some kind of fitness for duty evaluation before they come back.
Chair Palmisano, the focus on this graph are those employees that went through the workers' comp, and typically that is going to be a physical injury associated with that.
I
So
see.
it would not necessarily include those who may be seeking services as a result of where they're at after a critical incident. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The number of overtime hours worked, the upper bar graph there, we did see from 2018 to 2017 an increase of about 554 overtime hours worked from the previous year. And before I go any further, Chair Palmisano, committee members, if you don't mind, I'd like to have Director Mcpherson join us to talk a little bit more about that.
Welcome, Ms. Mcpherson.
Thank you very much. If you can just bear with me, I'm going to bring up a couple of slides here. Madam Chair, thank you very much for having us talk about overtime a little bit. I know that this was a focus question on overtime, and there were also some questions that were submitted regarding expenses as well. So I'm going to start with expenses and then flow into overtime if that's all right. But I just wanted to give a kind of a brief view of the 2019 budget that we're in right now to show that the majority of our expenses are obviously payroll and fringe. And one of the questions that came to us was, what are the other expenses? What are your more discretionary expenses that are out there that you're incurring? But this first slide basically shows that our numbers are staying pretty consistent from year to year. The growth area is obviously in the personnel costs. Those are primarily through salary increases. So if you look actually at the pie chart, you can see that there's approximately 79% are payroll and fringe. The 16% are contractual. And that number, that 16%, is growing slightly as well as we see more and more things going to either software licensing, subscription type things. So we're seeing an uptick in that, really due to the increase in technology usage in the department. This slide, just to show you in broad buckets, usually when you look at the budget every year, you're seeing things in a fairly consolidated manner. So I thought I would pull these out so you could actually see more of a line item basis of what some of our major expenses are. On the left side, I consider these more specific type expenses. I don't want to say direct, but they're more specific. They're basically earmarked for specific things. So as an example, if you look at down towards the bottom, the contracted special expenses, those are things that we have contracts for specifically due to our operational needs. So as an example, the BCA DNA analysts would be in there. The corner house that we use for juvenile investigations, veterinary services, stables, translation services. So again, everything on the left side is pretty much almost year for year. We're seeing the same type of expenses, and in many cases a similar vendor because it's a sole source. On the right-hand side are what I consider really more discretionary expenses. And even those are not exactly completely discretionary in the normal financial term that you would use. Those are primarily our supplies, and even in that, you'll notice we have the offender notification, which is a requirement, as well as some of the crime lab supplies. So as you can see when you look at that, that's less than 1% of our budget. So we have very little room to maneuver unless we make some major changes within how we're handling things. A lot of times if we have an expense that comes along that we feel for whatever reason we need to incur, whether it be consulting fees or something else, a lot of times we do that through either timing changes with hiring or having some really heart-to-heart talks on some of the things that we're doing. So before I go into payroll, any questions about just the expense categories? Some of the questions that came up in overtime and that came through on the focus questions is first just informational. So the first one is Super Bowl. Fortunately, we're past those now. But the Super Bowl overtime event costs, which were the direct overtime costs, were right around $600,000 in 2018. The Super Bowl backfill costs, okay, which is a much more difficult number to come to, so this is very much an estimate and very much an art, not a science, was approximately $700,000. And that means that over a period of approximately 3 months, during the Super Bowl time period, people were not allowed to take vacation. We had 500 officers who were working on Super Bowl. Scheduling things got difficult. And so over a period of time, those people then have to come back and they take vacation, they're sick, whatever the scheduling needs to adjust for it. And so there's the backfill costs, there's substantially more because the overtime goes up to backfill for those positions. The next is, as was noted on the focus questions, the payroll hours were pretty consistent between 2017 to 2018, but the cost went up by approximately $850,000. There's two very specific reasons and a lot of small reasons, but the two biggest reasons that are actually over $800,000. The first one is due to comp time. So when comp time is earned, the hours go into the numbers that you saw, the $105,000 for 2018, but the dollar cost is not recognized until the comp time is actually taken as paid time. So in 2018, the comp time hours actually decreased the comp time earned by 10,000 hours. And the reason it decreased was because there was a federation contractual change that was signed in 2017. So in fact, long ago, I don't know how long, but definitely before I was around, officers could earn comp time up to 480 hours. Now, and then prior to this current contract, it went down to 60 hours, and now it's at 50 hours, okay? And there's a very specific business reason why we do not want to have comp hours, or we want to minimize the comp hours, and that's really due to cost. So comp hours not only cost comp time, just like overtime, same time and a half, but the difference is that the officers can take comp time really at the last minute, where vacation you have to give the 28-day notice. So what happens is, if somebody says they want to take a comp time day, then it has to be filled with backfilled with overtime. So it's not only costing the cost of the comp time, but now you have the overtime. So it's almost double, not in all cases, but in many cases. So it's in our interest to try to reduce that comp time cost as much as possible. So again, the last contract was through 2014, but it wasn't signed until 2017, and so that's why you're seeing the decrease in the two years. So right now, if you look at that 105,000 hours in 2018, the mix of actual payroll paid out versus comp time earned is different by 10,000 hours than it was in 2017. Okay. The second reason is because the rate increase was not recognized for the new contract until the end of 2017, there was actually a bump in overtime just because of the rate increase. So now the rate increase was, of course, started in 2015, but everything in 2015, 2016, and much of 2017 was actually charged at the 2014 rates. So we had retro pay, but the retro pay only hit one account. But in 2018, you're seeing the effect of basically 3 years of increase in that one time period for overtime. Is that?
Yes, so Ms. Mcpherson, what you're saying is, in 2017, when the Federation contract was signed with the city had to basically go back 3 years and reimburse people for a higher amount of overtime that they had already worked.
That is correct. And it wasn't, we had accrued some amount in there, but certainly not the full amount.
Okay, thank you, that's important, and that was my question. Councilmember Fletcher?
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. So just making sure I understand, thinking about the Super Bowl is kind of an extraordinary event. If we take out that 1.3 million, overtime actually would have gone down.
Yes.
Overall. So in terms of thinking about departmental trends, I don't want to let the Super Bowl sort of skew and create an impression that overtime is just going up and up and up and up and up. In fact, our overtime usage would have gone down but for this extraordinary event.
That is correct. And I will, again, I'm not saying it would go down that $1.3 million, but it definitely went down. And I will tell you that last year, there was a concerted effort to reduce overtime after Super Bowl, and we tried some different things. We actually added some software. I mean, it was really all hands on deck to try to manage the overtime. So, and I think we had some pretty good success. So, and then Final Four, just for your information too, that information will come in June. And we tried some different things for Final Four as well that I think were extremely successful as far as handling large scale events. So.
Ms. Mcpherson, just looking at the data 2014 to 2018, trying to take out the Super Bowl piece, as Councilmember Fletcher mentioned. Is this still a typical amount of overtime hours for a department your size?
Excellent question. Thank you. Actually, the MCC finance side, finance arm of the Major City Chiefs organization, does a survey once a year, and the average overtime compared to total is 3%, and we're right around 3%. So we're right in the. Now, I will tell you, we all struggle with keep maintaining overtime as a reasonable amount. That's partly an issue of staffing, partly an issue of just the jobs we do, and flexibility and things like that. But yeah, 3% is actually pretty average.
Thank you.
So,
Councilmember Cunningham?
I actually am going to defer to the mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Thank you, Madam Chair Palmisano. Chief, thank you for the transparency and the data. Just the other day, we were listening to the audit committee present on their results in Minneapolis, and they did in fact note that the amount of data that the police department has handed over was pretty extraordinary, and so we do appreciate it. I also had a couple of questions about overtime. I was reading some national trends that may or may not apply to MPD, showing that for every hour worth of overtime, it equated to a correlation in other categories. So, for instance, an increase and for an additional hour of overtime, there was perhaps an increase in injury or in workers' compensation claims. For an additional hour in overtime, there was an increase in the use of force. Do we track any of that data, or do you have a feel for what that looks like?
Chair Palmisano, Mayor Fry. So we are intentionally starting to track that now, specifically with our wellness coordinator, Sergeant Savaggio. One of the very startling trends that we're seeing across the country in terms of policing is sleep and deprivation of sleep as it relates to overtime. There appears to be a correlation between increased uses of force, increase of officer injury and community injury, and so we definitely want to make sure that we're tracking the amount of overtime our officers are working. So you're correct in that, Mayor. Yeah.
So now that I just said that the 3% was average, I guess I want to pull back a little bit. So we look at overtime and I look at it from a financial standpoint. And of course, I think that should be the end of the story, right? But it's really not the end of the story. Overtime is really more of an operational issue with some financial data involved. And the problem with looking at only the financial data for overtime is it misses the picture of what's not being done. So when you look at case closure, when you look at cases unassigned, when you look at patrol officers that are only responding to 911 calls and not beat officers, you have an issue where maybe the work isn't being done. And that's not going to be picked up in any of the overtime numbers. So the other interesting research that is coming out talking about officer wellness is that not only is productivity hurt as well as injuries going up and things like that, but almost as important, maybe even more important in many cases, is the incidence of complaints goes significantly higher. So there's not a lot of research out yet. There's really only 4 major studies right now that have looked at some of this information. And a lot of it has to do with sleep deprivation. But the early indications are it's pretty significant and it happens fairly quickly. It's not like somebody working 60 or 70 hours a week. It's more like somebody working a 13-hour day occasionally. So it's much lower. I was really surprised by how low it is where that starts kicking in to be an issue. So we'll obviously be doing more and more research on that as time goes by and as more information is available. But some of the information is really actually quite staggering.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for this information. It's incredibly informative. A question that I have, and maybe you can help me piece it together a little bit here, is I guess a part of the concern that I have around sleep deprivation and overworking are the off-duty hours that are worked. How are we calculating that? Are we calculating that into anything? Because, you know, it's like if folks are working overtime and then they're going and doing off-duty hours, it's like, yeah, they're going to be pretty sleep deprivated if that's how it's working. So I'm just curious as to how that fits into it.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, yes, that is very important, and we are beginning to actually look at that from a couple of different standpoints. Obviously, the first most important one is the employee wellness, we have to make sure that our employees are fully engaged, physical mindset are ready, and able to do the job here first and foremost, their regular job. But we also know that part-time plays a key in that. And as Dr. Mcpherson just mentioned, the studies that have shown it doesn't take a whole lot. Like, you know, it's not like 80 hours past your regular work week, but it can be small increments that can have an impact. So we are looking at that. I think Mayor Fry indicated the audit team we've asked them to look at specifically department employee part-time or overtime in that same regard, because that's going to impact employee wellness. It's going to impact compliance, our OPCR, internal affairs, and just their engagement with our community. So again, that's a culture shift for this department. Part-time has been a part of this organization forever. But we've never really had our eye on the ball and looked at the impacts of that to the employee and to the community that we interact with. So we are looking at that. Yes.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. That's something that I've just carried a lot of concern about, because I'm like, wow, a full-time job, probably putting in some overtime, and then another part-time job on top of that. That makes sense that would wear folks down. So thank you so much for having your eye on that.
I think the last question that came up was really talking about staff shortage and how we code and how we look at staff shortage from when we're entering time into our time and summary system. And we do have a code for staff shortage. You have to remember that there is a lot of overlap in some of these codes. And there's also, I think, some question on whether a code applies or not. But the data says or shows that approximately 30% of our overtime is coded to staff shortage. So that equates to about 30,000 hours a year, which, if you look at the number of hours an officer works, is about 17 people. So that's been pretty consistent over the last 3 years. So.
Thank you, Mayor Fry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, I heard a statistic the other day, I believe it was from you, that noted that newer, younger officers were actually using less overtime. And if there's anything more about that statistic that you could share, I just thought it was an interesting factoid.
Chair Palmisano, Mayor Fry, yes, we are seeing a generational shift in the culture. When I came on the Minneapolis Police Department 30 years ago, overtime was something that was part and parcel of just you expected to work it after your shift or before your shift. Today's generation of employees and our newer employees, no, they do not prefer to work overtime, and that's a good thing. But what has happened is when we have some of these other factors that Director Mcpherson had talked about with comp time earned and folks want to take time, it can leave a precinct without people there to fill those shifts. But you're absolutely right. We are at a generation now of newer officers joining the MPD. Mayor's indicated that they stay away from overtime. It's not something that, as you mentioned, the work-life balance, that's not something that is a part of what they want to encompass. So, yes.
And that's really interesting from the perspective that when I asked informally to do a look on the number of off-hour or off-duty work going on, just based on call numbers, which sometimes on large events downtown, several officers working off-duty share a call number. There were, on average, 76 a day of off-duty work to be performed in our city, and how we choose to make those decisions of whether or not we want to require things like off-duty officers based on certain kinds of event permits or other kinds of permits, something we're also going to need to look at. Councilmember Cunningham, did you have another comment or question?
Yes, thank you.
To cut you off.
And I also have thought a lot about that, about like us as a council requiring off-duty officers and for licensing conditions and things like that, and how that's impacting our workforce. I guess my question is the overtime strictly in the precincts, or is it in investigations? Where is that overtime living?
Chair Palmisano to Councilmember Cunningham, another very good question. So as was indicated just now regarding the number of overtime or part-time contracts throughout the city, whether it's parking ramps and U.S. Bank Stadium and other things, it requires, with our workforce, it requires officers who work patrol, it requires officers who work investigations. The number of individual employees that work overtime within our city of Minneapolis, it touches all spectrums of the organization. We have SROs who work overtime. We have investigators, 4th Precinct officers, downtown officers. It touches the entire organization. Yes.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I am so glad we're having this conversation, by the way. This is something that's been important to me for a long time. We are doing an audit so that others that are on the audit committee know. I know Jeremy Schrader knows. We are doing an audit on off-duty work just to try to size that, how many of our officers are working, how much off-duty, what's the size of the concern that we all hold. So, thank you. I do want to note for my colleagues, we are quite a bit over time for police, but it's to me this is really important, and unless I'm hearing negative, I'm feeling like this is good, and if it means we're going to need to ask fire to be pushed to, which would be our 4th presentation today, to be moved to one of our overflow time slots, that's how it's going to be. So, Chief, continue on.
Chair Palmisano, committee members, I also just on that last piece, when we talked about the impact of overtime far-reaching throughout the organization, that was one of the reasons when we asked for additional body cameras for even investigators, because we know that after they leave their assignment investigations, they will adorn the uniform and perhaps be working a part-time job, and so having that body-worn camera is important as well. So, next slide before us looks at complaints filed against Minneapolis police officers. And so really the two meaningful things here in this bar graph, when we look at those complaints that are handled by the Office of Police Conduct Review and the Internal Affairs Unit, clearly just about the vast majority, 97%, are filed with the OPCR. I should say that the small percentage that Internal Affairs Unit investigates are typically those where there be sexual harassment of city employees. Internal Affairs teams up with our HR investigator in conducting those. But the vast majority, and I think that was the original intent of the ordinance back in 2012, related to the OPCR, was to have community and a way to funnel the vast majority of those complaints through the Office of Police Conduct Review, where the joint supervisors will take a look at that and then distribute that to those folks who are going to investigate it. The second slide here, I should also just say in the that first bar graph too, MPD, we as a department also will forward complaints through to the Office of Police Conduct Review. Whether it's squad car accidents or other types of things that are generated from a precinct, we will also forward those to the Office of Police Conduct Review as well. Second slide there that looks at settlements. We see that from those previous 5 years, we have seen a decline in those. This next slide looks at use of force. I think it was very important for me when I came into my position, and certainly what our vision is going to be, and as I certainly as chief try to change culture, I recognize that the overwhelming majority of our contacts with our community members will never require the use of force, and that is certainly something, making sure that both our community members and our officers complete their shifts, everyone goes home safely, is very important. So the slide there, the first slide, we see that there has been a decrease in the amount of use of force reports. There were 262 less number of reported instances of force from 2018 to 2017. And in the second slide over, we also saw that there was 160 less number of incidents in which force was reported. The past decade, we've seen about a 48% decrease in the use of force, and it is very important for us to continue to bolster things, not only the employee wellness that we're all talking about and looking at how sleep and those things play into it, but also critically de-escalation, making sure that we're infusing procedural justice in all of our, all the things we do in terms of our culture and our DNA within the department.
Chief, I think you just answered my question, which was going to be, how can we continue this trend for MPD to see a decrease of use of force incidents from your perspective?
Chair Palmisano, I think that there's I think that the work that we're really trying to do and focus on mindfulness, employee wellness, I think that's going to be very key, very important. Training is obviously very critical. And what our officers are being taught, not only from the inception of entering our academies, but throughout their careers here. I think another important thing that on the front end, I had the opportunity to review our pre-employment psychologists that had wanted to have a contract with the city of Minneapolis, and making sure that we had a psychologist that really understood procedural justice, that understood employee wellness, the impacts of that, the character traits that I'm really looking forward to seeing in the men and women who do this job, and how that impacts our communities. And so there's all of those things that I think that will continue to play a big role in policy as well. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham, did you have a question or thought?
No, I just haven't been cleared from the queue yet.
Oh.
Okay. The next slide here that just again focuses on the high-risk warrants that resulted with no injury. Again, the vast majority of those that occur, there were no community members or officers injured in that. And again, it highlights the decrease in number of bomb sweeps. I think the next one over looks at our encounters with individuals with limited English proficiency. We know that Minneapolis is a very diverse city that has many community members that speak languages other than English. The MPD continues to provide language assistance services to those folks that we encounter. As we continue to diversify our workforce and having more officers that speak some of our different predominant languages other than English on the force will also help with those engagements. Second slide over also looks at our emotionally disturbed persons incidents. Again, the great work of co-responders is helping quite a bit in that, and the fact that now we have that extended throughout, we'll have it precinct-wide or city-wide, is very important. And then the last slide there about number of positive contacts. And while you see from 2018 to 2017, there was a reduction, I just want to say that does not include the great work that our community engagement teams are doing, our Bike Cops for Kids are doing, our folks, our officers are working with Little Earth young Native girls, as well as Explorers and PALs. So we are still making sure that we're touching points on all of those different areas. The last slide here talks about, looks at our traffic data stops. I would like to say that there's some data that is not quite accurate in this, just because as we were transferring our new records management system over, some of this data was not able to capture in these slides. But I will say that we have had very thoughtful, very good discussions as it relates to MPD's traffic stops, particularly with people of color. And I know that there is ongoing discussions about looking at that further and what are some things we can do in that regard, specifically as it relates to equipment violation stops. So, and again, I think it's important just to note that the fact that we are a department, one of the few in the nation, that really puts out there in our dashboards a lot of that data, that helps to tell our story, that helps to better inform us, and as me as chief, to see how we can improve in those areas. So, with that, Chair Palmisano.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, for the stops by race, I see East African, but I don't see Black. Can you just explain, would African American fall within the other? Could you just clarify? I was excited to see it was disaggregated, but then I didn't see the other component of it.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, I smile only because when I saw the slide too, that was the first thing I said, and so that was part of this. It was not captured, but I will just say that African Americans make up the majority of those, and that's why I wanted to make that statement just before I talked about this slide here. So somehow it was cut off when they were transferring it over. So. But we have the accurate data here. This did not capture it in this here slide here.
So Black was just left off, with the exception of East African?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, that's my understanding.
Okay.
Ms. McDonald.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham. Yes, unfortunately, when the chart was put on the PowerPoint, it was somehow the racial information was dropped for that category. I do have the totals if you would like them, though.
Yeah, that would be so appreciated. That could be sent
Sure.
out to the council.
And I can provide an updated chart for you if you
That'd
would
be
like.
great. Thank you so much.
Sure. But for 2016, Black accounted for 27%. For 2017, they accounted for 29%, and for 2018, it was 30% of the total.
And that's disaggregated from East African in those previous years as well?
Correct.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I wanted to go back a couple of slides. You don't have to go back to the slide necessarily, but just noting that the complaints filed against officers saw an almost 50% increase from 2017 to 2018, and I was just curious if there's been a proportional increase in discipline taken as a result of those complaints, or sort of what the trend is.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher, that's another very good question. Some of those, again, some of those increases were MPD sending a lot of complaints to OPCR themselves, officer squad car accidents, other types of things. But I have not looked at the breakdown yet in terms of that comparison to discipline. I haven't, yeah.
Are there any other questions or thoughts on this results presentation? Chief, I want to thank you so much for digging into, so many different areas. We do have a comment or question from the council president.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do think that during the civil rights presentation, there was some information shared about discipline numbers actually going down. It had one of the little red circles. So I think we had asked some questions there, and it's worth following up just to get a handle on what those numbers really mean and what the trends are.
Chair Palmisano, Council President Bender, thank you for noting that. Yes.
And with that, we're going to finally let you go and move on to the next. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Ms. McDonald, Ms. Mcpherson, Mr. Booty. Next, we have the City Attorney's Office, so I'll just pause as we transition. I have been in communication with our City Assessor, who willingly offers to move to one of our other overflow time slots, because Public Works is going to be a big one here as well. Not to minimize one of our smaller but very important departments, the City Attorney's Office. So welcome, Director Siegel.
Good afternoon, and happy to be here. We have been really busy in the City Attorney's Office, and you have an amazing staff in the people in my office, both in our criminal division as well as in our civil division. You have a couple of additional charts there because we realized as we were preparing for this, we had some off numbers in a couple of our charts. We have different people conveying data, and then it gets put into a chart, and some of it was just, in a couple of areas, was wrong. We weren't cooking the books, even though it did turn some reds into greens on the first chart here. But trust us, we're your lawyers.
So just to remind colleagues, it is these two individual papers in front of you that replace the associated ones in your packet today. And we all have actually struggled with the stoplight model of whether an increase is good or a decrease is good and what the associated colors are for it. So that is something that we maybe have yet to work out here in our system.
So on that shaky start, our presentation can only go up from there. I would say we are making progress and trying to make progress, both in being more effective in our work, as well as moving towards reforms in the criminal justice system that we all agree are long overdue, as well as supporting all of you with the important work you're doing with, whether it be some of the workplace laws like minimum wage ordinance and other ordinances that are in the drafting stage now. If there aren't questions about all these green dots that one used to be red but is now green, I'm going to move on. In the area of workforce diversity, that's an important value of the city and it's an important value of our office. And we are working hard to increase diversity in our office. And one thing I've done over the last year is join some of the affinity bar associations. They're very inexpensive to join, and tried to become more active there. And we are becoming more proactive in our outreach. We are currently doing IDI work with our whole management staff and working with a consultant there, to work on our leadership skills. We're not where we want to be, but we are committed to doing better and doing more. The spending chart, I think this is a citywide chart because we have very little discretionary spending within the city attorney's office, but we are, our office manager and leadership in our office are working hard there also with target market program and otherwise. On department priorities, as I mentioned.
If I may pause you.
Yes, go ahead.
Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and thank you, Ms. Siegel. I'm curious, you talked about diverse spending. When you contract out for legal services, is that included in your spending or?
Madam Chair and Council Vice President, yes, it is. And we do make an effort both in terms of the administrative hearing officers, which go through our civil division budget, as well as with outside counsel. Our outside counsel spend has been almost non-existent in the last couple of years. So that's, which is good news for the city's budget because we've handled just about everything in-house. But we do keep an eye on that. And for example, I know we have at least one law firm that qualifies as a minority business enterprise that we do contract with and do use for things like title matters and other things like that, which we do need periodically, and keep an eye on that because that's another important area. Our biggest spending areas are online legal research, which we really have no option on, and then the workhouse budget runs through our office as well. So
Online legal research, like subscriptions to various
through Westlaw
journals. Okay.
Yeah, and there aren't very many options, and and they're a couple of really big companies, and we don't have much option there. But we are trying to be mindful, and we'll do better. We had one, for example, like our office manager, who's done a great job of focusing on this work. We did have a diverse clerical temporary services agency, but then that got sold to somebody who was no longer a minority business, and we were not aware of that. So trying to stay on top of those kinds of things where we do have those opportunities, and we've got we're hiring the most qualified contractor, and if that's also a minority contractor, that's terrific, and that's what we want to see and help develop and support those businesses.
Right. Yeah, thank you. No, it'd be great if we can continue to try to support those entities out there.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I appreciate all of the focus and attention and your questioning of all of us, honestly, on issues of race and equity.
Yeah.
It's critically important to keep it
On top of mind.
foremost. That's exactly right, because otherwise we just aren't going to make the progress that we need to make.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I do want to point out, we didn't let police off the hook entirely. I did send them a follow-up question on their minority spend. I wasn't sure what kinds of things the police department spends that money on, but I'll get that information and send it to colleagues. Councilmember Schrader, you have a question or comment?
Yep. Thanks, Chair Palmisano. I did want to go back to the red lights on the first one. You can go very briefly, but just wanted to know, why there's less defendants being put in diversion programs and why there's a decrease in domestic violence cases or convictions.
If you turn to page, let's see. If you turn to page 4, I guess, we got 2 pages on one, so I think it says 5 in the bottom right corner. Most of that happens to be in this driver diversion program, the reduction. And we believe, and if Mary Ellen, my criminal deputy, has anything to add, there is a bit of a backlog at the Department of Motor Vehicle Services, and they have to screen everybody for eligibility. So I think there's been a bit of a slowdown there. And then I also want to put in a plug that Mary Ellen Hang, in partnership with our Public Defender's Office, has just done an amazing job of helping lobby for a change in our state laws so that people will no longer have their driver's licenses suspended or revoked just for failure to pay fines and fees. That passed the legislature last session. It got hung up in a giant omnibus public safety bill that had a number of provisions that were unacceptable to Governor Dayton, so was vetoed. It is included on both sides, the Senate and the House bill, and so we're hopeful it finally gets through in this term of the legislature, which will largely make this diversion program unnecessary because people won't have to enter this diversion program to get their licenses back. They can just enter into payment plans to pay off fines and fees, maybe get some of them reduced, excused, and not have that burden on them any longer. Does that help? And we're constantly looking for ways to expand, and we have expanded eligibility criteria. What we're really going to focus on now is ways that we can increase our pre-charge diversion numbers. So before a case is filed with the court, right now we don't have great ways to communicate with individuals because it's the police out there handing out a citation. And so we mail letters, but that is not the most effective way to communicate with people and get them interested in a diversion opportunity that's available to them that will help prevent them from having any kind of a criminal record in the courts, because that's before these citations are filed in the courts.
See, on those, maybe on the second question, when you get to that slide, if you could just address it, that'd be great.
Okay, yeah, and I'll have Mary Ellen can address it in greater detail. Any other questions about this chart or? Okay. So in our priorities, one thing we've worked hard on is bail reform and reducing use of the jail. Some things that we've already had in place is people are being released with no cash bail and no other conditions from the jail if they're in a lower risk category on this risk assessment tool. And this sign and release and book and release option for people who have for the first time on non-targeted, non-domestic misdemeanors, missed a court appearance. The law enforcement has the authority now through the courts, which this was all an idea that our Mary Ellen Hang, my criminal deputy, came up with, to hand out a new court date. And over 2/3 of those people are showing up for court, and there have been over 5,000 arrests avoided as a result. And so that, you just heard the presentation from the police, that allows the police to continue to do what they do and spend their time on higher priorities. And it's 5,000 people over 5,000 who haven't had to deal with the jail. We're continuing that work, specifically focusing on cash bail reform. I'm putting together an advisory group. I've already met with the ACLU and Tanya Hansi with the Freedom Fund. And we're going to continue working on that, the areas that are within our ability here in Hennepin County District Court, and also working with Council Vice President Jenkins and I have had several conversations about this, but the Minneapolis Foundation has agreed to fund a forum to work that will take place in the fall to work towards statewide reform. I also was over in the legislature and testified in support of the bail reform bill in the Minnesota House, where Representative Newer is the chief author. As you mentioned, increasing diversion opportunities and certainly not having fewer numbers of people into diversion. It's something we believe in very strongly. Mary Ellen will talk about our Pathways program. This is an alternative for individuals charged with weapons offenses, gross misdemeanor weapons offenses, the ones within our jurisdiction. So instead of spending 30 days in the workhouse, individuals who opt into this program getting a needs assessment and getting trauma-informed, culturally specific programming through Urban Ventures. And we had the opportunity, the mayor was there with us, and we had the opportunity to attend the graduation of the first, 16, Mary Ellen? And it was one of the most, Mary Moriarty was there from the public defender's office, and it was, I can't tell you how it validates all the stress that we all go through in our day-to-day work here in City Hall. Evenings like that make it all worthwhile, because these are young men, many of them with children, some of them added on voluntary programming at Urban Ventures about parenting, who are going to go on. Some of them have gotten jobs already, others are getting other help, and they're doing really, really well. And this is a group of people that I think, I don't want to talk for the public defender's office, but I think they approach this like, yeah, nice try, we think these guys are going to fail out. And instead, it's just very promising. I was contacted by Professor Matthew Mcpherson, who heads up the Smart Decarceration Project at the University of Chicago. And he's including our Pathways program. He wants to evaluate that as one of 3 programs he wants to evaluate as part of gun violence prevention research that he's doing. So I just could not be more pleased with that result. And more, we are looking to address underlying needs instead of just punishing deeds. And Mary Ellen will talk a little bit about this restorative court that she worked hard to get started in Hennepin County District Court, that's staffed by social workers. And so people who have needs that social workers can help make referrals for, and they voluntarily want to do that. This is another pathway, and it's a pathway off the traditional criminal prosecution treadmill. And then with things coming online like 1,800 Chicago, where they have a mental health behavioral center. That's another really positive, so that officers now will have this alternative and keep people out of the criminal justice system. And we agreed with the public defender's office that we would not prosecute people who were brought there. And I already mentioned briefly on our civil side, because mostly we wind up there's lots of statistics around our criminal division work, but there we've worked hard to support city initiatives around workers' rights. We've had great success with minimum wage and sick and safe time. The Minnesota Supreme Court recently said they were going to accept our minimum wage case for review by the Supreme Court. We will, we will continue to do our great work, and are optimistic that we will get a good, strong result out of that court. Something else I'm personally happy about, because I was having to help, to lead the city's juvenile sex trafficking work group, so I authored the grant proposal that brought us Sunu Shrestha for 2 years, and so I've been able to shovel that off on her, and she's expanded it with full support and encouragement from this council and the mayor to really deal with all forms of trafficking. So not just sex trafficking, but wage theft and labor trafficking. So whatever form it takes, and she's just doing great work. All right, I am going to move right along because I know we're short on time today, and I'm going to turn this over to Mary Ellen Haig.
Hi, good afternoon. So in answer to your question, Councilmember Schrader, about the diversion programs, it's kind of a complicated answer. What Susan said is part of it with the driving diversion program. Certainly, DVS, because of the backlog, has decided to let go some of their control, and so now they're doing a very smaller level of acceptance, and then the program itself is doing more, and so that we fixed that problem. For the rest of it, some of it is a byproduct of some of the other good work that we've done. We're seeing, frankly, the police issuing less tickets for some of the crimes that would be diversion eligible. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but those are cases that otherwise would have come to our office and been diverted. Another change that, again, is not necessarily a bad change that happened in the system was some of our offenses that are diversion eligible no longer can be booked in the jail due to a standing order from the Hennepin County District Court. The primary two are consuming in public and loiter open bottle. We send a lot of those through restorative justice. So now those are being issued citations. Those are citations that are payable offenses, and it would take me a long time to tell you the difference, but the long and the short is those don't always come to court, and we have yet to find a really good way to locate all those citations. And so some people don't respond to those citations. Some people simply pay them without knowing they have this opportunity. So we're still thinking about how do we kind of find of the tickets that are issued. Some of the other work we're doing is we're going to have a young man with our office this summer as a recent college graduate, and one of my projects for him is I'm going to have him look at all of the people that we have said are not eligible for these programs based on some of the criteria we set. We have, if they have a prior felony, we're not allowing them to do diversion, certain other exclusionary factors. And what I'm interested in knowing is, of those people, how old was the felony? Because right now it's just a blanket exclusion. It's the way we started, and it's been that way for years. And I think it's time to look at some of those things to see if we can increase our eligibility pool. If someone has a 10-year-old felony and they've not had much activity, and now they have a public urination, they should probably go and do diversion. So we're going to be looking at a lot of our eligibility criteria this summer, and hopefully get some good data and make some changes that will increase the pool that we can offer. And then, as Susan indicated, we are going to really try to work with other departments that can have a better sense of how do we do that community outreach to let people know these programs are out there, that if they get a ticket, they could proactively contact us and say, was this something I can do? Or when they get the communication from our office, they understand what it is and, don't just see a letter with city letterhead and say, oh my gosh, and throw it away. So I think our numbers are still staying good, but there definitely is a lot of work we can do to try to increase that pool, because it is the people that go through are very successful, and we did a recidivism study, and a lot of our successful people in all these programs, very few of them reoffended with anything, and the majority of them, if they got anything, is generally some traffic tickets again, which is a part of a whole bigger issue. So I think our diversion programs are working. I think they're strong, but we certainly have more work to do to improve them. Our Pathways program, Susan touched on it a little bit. That has, as she said, been very surprisingly effective. It got off to a very slow start. We actually started it in May of 2017. We didn't get a lot of people wanting to take it under the way we offered it. So in September of 2017, we decided to make a real, I think, kind of bold decision and offer stay of adjudications on these cases, meaning if the person entered the program, they wouldn't have a conviction on their record, and if successful, they never have a conviction. That was enough of an incentive to give some of these individuals to try the program. And then once they got in, they've been very committed and very successful. I just updated our numbers last night. We have found 91 eligible, we've had 138 total cases. We've offered it to 91 individuals. 54 have accepted that program. We have about 30 or so in the program right now. We're going to, I think, have a graduation again this summer. We've got 20 more that are waiting to decide if they're going to resolve their case with the program. But so we are getting a nice steady stream of applicants that are interested in going through the program. One of the things I think makes this program unique is we are really looking at them as individuals, and we know that they're going to have some ups and downs, and Urban Ventures has been a great partner. They frequently reach out to me and say this person has this problem, or if they are kind of falling off the radar, I file a probation violation. That gets their attention immediately, and they come back in and say, what can we do to stay in the program? We generally don't have any more issues with them. They re-engage. We've also modified the program. What I found is when I ended up filing 8 or 10 violations, and they were all people in the second phase, and I asked Priscilla Brown, I said, why is that? They should be doing really well. And she said it was just simply too long, and they were moving on with their lives, and they were forgetting about the once a week contact, and they just were forgetting to call, and then they would drop off. And so we modified the program to make it more reasonable so that we wouldn't have people, necessarily violating our parameters. And so I think it's been really successful because we're able to make it very fluid. And but so far, yeah, we're going to be looking at some recidivism. We had our first person complete their probation 2 years, not anything on their record, not even a parking ticket. We've got a whole bunch more coming up in the next few months, and I'll do records checks on them. I assume it's going to be the same. They have had very little, if any, involvement in the criminal justice system. And so we hope as we keep looking down the line, we'll continue to see that that's the case. And that would be a big shift compared to what we saw when we looked at the data before we started this program, where 70% ended up committing very violent felonies and ended up in prison before they were 30. So that's a huge shift.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just really excited about this program. I think that it's really remarkable, and to have Urban Ventures at the table is really just like such critical skills being added, and I'm really grateful that this program exists and is moving forward and producing the results that we had deduced based on research and the theories. Please let us know when the graduation is going to be this summer so that the council can be there, council members who are available. And I'm also curious about, are there any plans to do potentially an ROI study on what is being invested into this program and how money is being saved, both like from the criminal justice system perspective through this program? I'm just curious about that.
We expect that could be part of this University of Chicago research, and we definitely want that because we pay per night, per diem for the workhouse. This program is more expensive maybe than 30 days in the workhouse, but not by that much, and they're getting so much out of this, and in terms of savings of future costs, setting aside the human part of this, that having them have better lives and better opportunities and not being hamstrung for the rest of their lives with a gross misdemeanor weapons conviction, just monetarily, I think it makes a lot of dollars and cents. So.
I think that information would be super helpful because I think it really speaks to if we're investing in prevention and intervention, and we're thinking about re-entry when folks are coming out of the system, if we're like, that is a way for us to really long-term be saving dollars in other areas. So thank you so much for that information.
Thank you. If we could move on to the next
Let's
part.
move on. Yeah. Jen, real quickly on Jennifer Saunders is the supervisor of our domestic violence team. So, and tell us how quickly you want us to go through this. We're happy to answer any questions, but we don't want to belabor this.
Yeah,
we're lawyers. Put us in front of a microphone. We'll talk forever. We're not quite as bad as elected officials.
As attorneys, you're pretty hard to cut off. I'm hoping this is eating into Public Works time in just a few minutes, and I want to make sure that's such a big department so if we could try to keep the rest of the presentation to about 10 or 15 minutes, that'd be proportional.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, thanks.
My father said I became a lawyer because I love to argue and I never shut up, so I will fight that as hard as I can. My name is Jennifer Saunders. I am the supervising attorney since March of last year of our domestic abuse team, which handles only intimate partner violence cases. We have 6 attorneys and 6 support staff, including an attorney and a paralegal embedded in our domestic assault unit with the MPD. And as you can see, our priority is handling the intimate partner violence cases to get the best result possible, taking into consideration the impact of that decision on the family involved. These cases are very unique. They're not just a single criminal incident. They generally are a manifestation of ongoing behaviors, ongoing issues within a family, and also those issues don't stop at the end of the criminal prosecution. Very often what we see are situations where the victims involved in the cases do not want us to prosecute the cases. Our internal information shows us that about 75% of our victims are uncooperative with prosecution. The national level is actually closer to 80%. They don't want the person prosecuted. They just want the violence to stop. And obviously, if we can get some sort of accountability, that's a very good way to get it to stop, but it's much more complex than that. And to circle back to Councilmember Schrader's question about the drop in the conviction rate, we don't have a single answer for that. I will say that you can see over the years that it's very clear when we introduced the higher level of evidence collection in 2008 and the following years from the MPD, where they were gathering much better information, and we did see a significant increase at that time. And it's fluctuated over the years since then, but 50% was at the time, especially about the national average due to those factors. We look at various types of factors that determine success. We have been able to move our cases through the system a little bit more quickly. We try to get the cases charged and moving as quickly as possible. The second portion of the slide shows you that we are trying to get these gone on arrival cases processed as quickly as possible. The cases where an arrest is made, the person's in court the next day, so those tend to go very quickly, but the gone on arrival cases can take a bit longer to get into the system. So we have been working on that. We are very cognizant of the fact that sometimes the best result is not a conviction. And since I've become the supervisor, I have stressed that our duty as prosecutors is not to get a conviction necessarily. Our duty as prosecutors is to see that justice is done. And in domestic cases, that involves a lot of different factors. So it is something I will say that we are keeping an eye on. I want to make sure we are getting justice for our victims, that we are making sure these cases are taken seriously. I can tell you that for the 6 attorneys and 6 support staff on my team, these cases are extremely serious. And we know that how the violence can escalate, and we're trying to intervene as early in the process and as effectively as we can. And
I'm going to have to pause you there. Council Member Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just curious, do you have to have victim consent or cooperation to charge or
It's an excellent question.
prosecute in domestic violence situations?
Thank you, Chair Palmisano and Councilmember Jenkins. That's an excellent question, and technically the decision lies with us, the prosecutor. The reality of trying to successfully prosecute a case without a victim cooperation, it is very difficult, and mainly, especially at our level of, we don't have generally significant injuries, we don't have a lot of other evidence, we are very heavily relying on the statements of the victims in the case. And while we do the very best we can, and I've worked very hard to provide my team with tools to try to get out-of-court statements in as much as possible, we still face up, like every prosecutor, with the confrontation clause. And because of that, there is a limit to how far we can go. We make it very clear when we're reaching out to the victims that we want their input, but the decision is ours. And that is in part to take that weight off of them, that they're not making the decision, we are. But the reality of prosecuting these cases is if we don't have a cooperative victim who's willing to testify, that it makes it much more difficult. But that's a very good question, and that really gets at the heart of what we're dealing with. So, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. And turn it back to Mary Ellen.
Yeah, and so we do use evidence-based prosecution, and one thing that we did with our misdemeanor cases is the police department, the responding officers, have an evidence-gathering protocol. So there's evidence gathered at the scene, they get a medical release signed so that we can get medical records to prove injuries so that we are able to proceed with cases. But as Jen said, I mean, it makes it more difficult. And we are doing, I know one thing you asked us about before, Council Vice President Jenkins, is outreach, particularly in the LGBTQ community, and we are working in that direction as well. We continue to do really well in our DWI cases, high conviction rate. We've been from the start how long is DWI court? 13 years. We've been huge supporters of that court, a treatment model, very successful. We are statewide experts on drug recognition cases as well, and recognized for that expertise. Mary Ellen's here if you've got any questions to ask about that. Otherwise, in the interest of time, we will move right along.
We're good. Yep.
Eric, civil.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, council members, mayor. The civil division is comprised of two teams, two business lines, the litigators and our client services team. The client services team handles all non-litigation matters for the city. These are what's been described by some as sort of the in-house counsel for the various city departments, but these are also probably the legal counsel that you all interact with the most. These are the attorneys that you see staffing your council committees and working on your policy initiatives, handling HR matters, reviewing contracts, the whole gamut of legal work. The client services team is further broken down into two sub-teams. We have a transactional team, our real estate and development transactional team, which is led by Nikki Newman, and then all of the other client services members who are led by Susan Trammell. It's an area that is notoriously difficult to measure with a metric. If we came up, we've thought about this over the years many times and come up with different ways to measure production or success, and they wouldn't really be meaningful to you. We could look at, number of assignments opened or closed, or ordinances drafted or completed. None of these things would have any real inherent meaning standing alone. And so what we've arrived at historically and what we intend to do going forward is a client satisfaction survey, which I think is probably the best way to measure that. The satisfaction survey on your slide is a bit stale. It was from a year ago. It's something that we will do again this year and going forward. I will just note that I don't suspect that the numbers will get worse. I think they could get better. And particularly the measure in the middle is encouraging, which is the measure of 90% for really what is the core work of the client services team. And that's effectively handling all of the range of legal services that they're asked to do. And so With that, we intend to continue the high-quality legal services we provide you, and then in the civil division, effectively are your full-service law firm, from researching legal authority to do things, to working on drafting the legislation, to defending that legislation or your policy initiatives if we're sued. So, moving into the next business line, I think Susan will address the litigation.
Any questions or thoughts about the civil? Nope. Thank you.
All right, so civil litigation, as I mentioned earlier, we do basically everything in-house. We continue to have a high success rate. In recent years, the number of cases resolved in court in favor of the city is just the vast majority of the matters that we handle. And so it's important to keep track of how many cases are we settling versus how many cases are we, being aggressive in court. And so we're doing really, really well. We also have the city of Minneapolis has filed suit. We're one of the we have a lawsuit against the opioid manufacturers and the distributors. Which is affirmative litigation, who we're suing to try to bring money back to the city. There's also one on aluminum sulfide. I think that's the right chemical that Public Works uses over in the waterworks. And so there was recently a settlement of that matter. We don't know how much will be coming to the city, once everybody's claims are adjusted, but there will be dollars coming into the city in connection with that. We've also been busy joining as an amicus in the myriad of litigation that our federal administration has given us the opportunity to sue them over, along with other jurisdictions. So if there are any other questions about civil litigation, no? All right, well, then finally, and we did argue with Mr. Smith about this, but because we have these different funds, we're now back in criminal in our community attorney program. Two things to note there: our Downtown 100 program continues to get good results, and it really is trying to connect people with social services. We're trying to keep people out of the workhouse and trying to get them the help that they need. We had a citywide program, and we have disbanded that. We still are working closely with community and neighborhood groups on their priorities, and the different safety committees and their needs. But with restorative court, we feel that that's a better approach, and a more cost-effective approach and the right way to work. Because as Mary Ellen was looking at this, and again, I'm giving her a lot well-deserved credit, we were seeing people with less chronic issues, and so it just made no sense anymore. And we feel we will continue to meet the needs of our residents in a better, more effective way, and get better results overall for everyone through restorative court and other tools at our disposal. So with that, I think that's the end. And now we bored our chair so much that she's just left the. No, she'll be back briefly. If there are no other questions, we'll let the next group tee up.
Very good. I don't see any other questions, so we'll let Public Works start setting up, and as we take a quick stretch break while they're getting ready.
Thank you all so much for your patience.
So
exciting. I'm not sure if that's.
I know.
So it looks like Public Works is ready to go. So to respect everybody's time, let's go ahead and invite Director Hutchison to begin your presentation. Thank you, Director Hutchison.
Thank you, Vice Chair Fletcher. That's correct, yes. Thank you so much, Vice Chair Fletcher and members of the Budget Committee. I'm Robin Hutchison. I'm the Director of Public Works. I am joined by most of my director team behind me. Thank you for being here. I also want to thank the results team who put together, we are a large department, and there's a tremendous amount of data and information, and I want to thank them for the time it took to assemble this presentation. Anna's not in here, but Anna Kelch did a fabulous job on this. I know we're short on time. I'm going to dive right in. We have a couple slides on our performance summary. I won't spend too much time on this, except to say that this dashboard of streetlights, green, yellow, and red, just give us a good indication of where we can spend some more time and improve our work. And I'll point some of those areas out as I go along in the presentation. Here's the second slide there. The first topic area I'm going to start on, as I think we all have, is the enterprise priorities of workforce diversity and spending with diverse suppliers. We know we have work to do here. While we see some good indicators in our trends, the workload is heavy to get us to where we need to be, and we are fully prepared and already investing in this. We are not meeting our enterprise goal of 41% of people of color, and we are not meeting our enterprise goal of 45% women. Some things that we are doing, and we have been doing for a couple of years, is we've really focused our recruitment strategies and partnerships with the community organizations, and that is resulting in our positive trend. Deputy Director Jelly put into my hands today a chart that shows that in the last 7 years or so, we've gone from hiring in our service worker category a total of about 20% people of color, now up to 50% people of color in each sort of cohort or class of 30 to 40 hires in a batch. That's good progress, and we need to keep the pressure on that so that we can continue to shift. In our last recruitment, we really saw a highlight on women. I mean that sort of in reverse. While we were proud of our recruitment efforts leading to 50% people of color being recruited onto our team, we were disappointed that only about 10% were female. And we're finding that to be an even bigger challenge than we initially anticipated, and a bigger challenge than recruiting people of color. So we're working both angles through numerous outreach events. We do about 20 targeted outreach events for all of our recruiting in the fall, every fall, and it's led by a dedicated staff person, Monique Fish, who gets out there and talks with people and really encourages them to be a part of the Public Works team. I myself participate in this as well, especially as it relates to women. I go to, as we all do, really all the directors stop into our agility training that we do with each of our new hires. And I think women need an extra level of support there, and I make it a point to talk with every single woman in that room and say, I did this, if I did the agility training, you can do this job. You can do this work. So we take great care in making sure they know that they are welcomed, that they should be comfortable, that they are capable, and we will support them in their work. One note here is that we are also working with Human Resources right now on the goal. 45% women in Public Works may be a high target. This is based on NAICS codes that includes hotel service workers, and we're not sure that that is giving us an accurate reflection of the community that we have to hire from. So we're working right now with Human Resources to either leave the goal as is or adjust the goal if we find that there's a better target that we should be shooting for. Spending with diverse suppliers, we are not meeting the diverse spending of 15%, and we're not meeting the citywide percent spending with minority-owned suppliers, 6%. We are exceeding the citywide percent spending with non-minority women-owned suppliers. trend is in the right direction here, and we're doing some things with our pool procurement that I believe are helping. So in our last pool contract request for proposal, we created a new contracting category for small firms. Many minority-owned and women-owned businesses are smaller in nature, and they don't have the same insurance that a large firm would have. And in public works, so many of our projects are large that if we're not deliberate about creating a category for small businesses to participate, we may not get any. So 2 years ago, we put that into the pool. We had some success. We are currently contracted with 7 small, tier 2, we call them tier 2 small businesses. All 7 of them identified as small business enterprises, 3 identified as minority business enterprises, 2 identified as women business enterprises, and 1 is a veteran-owned small business. So we are going to be reopening that pool, and we're going to continue this program. Director Corbel has helped us connect to firms and companies that we'd like to recruit, and we participate in some workshops that she has set up, and we're hoping to continue to improve in this area. And I promise not to talk that long on each slide, but I know that is of great interest to the entire city.
Don't worry, it would have been a question if you hadn't, so.
Okay. I'll move on to our largest budget category, which is our sanitary storm program, collection and treatment. We have some data here about our sanitary sewer backups and as well our 311 sewer issue cases. I'd like to dwell for just a moment on the sewer issue cases. When I first saw this, I really didn't know what to think or had to explain it. 1,111 311 sewer complaints, and yet we were only responsive in our service level to 26% of them. And then we had some aha moments after talking with our sewer staff. And this is directly related to something that's very important to the city of Minneapolis, and that is that this is caused very much by flooding, and that is a result of our changing climate. It's becoming increasingly difficult for us to respond to intense, short-duration rainfall, which creates intense, localized flooding. Just for example, Lisa Cerny told me that in the 2019 spring thaw that we just had, we got over 500 complaints in a single day. And so we can't respond to all 500 complaints within that service level. So they come in at very high volume in a very short period of time. Our next category in order is transportation operations and mobility. We operate both on and off-street parking for the benefit of our residents and businesses and anyone who is visiting the city. Our parking ramps, the average occupancy rate is 65%. This is a sometimes misleading number. This is the average of all the ramps. We have ramps that are downtown, such as the Hoff ramp, that is over 85% occupied. We have ramps such as the Vineland ramp by the Walker that can be as low as 20% occupied. So it depends on where it is and what the demand is, what the occupancy percentage is. And it's quite uneven throughout the city. We are watching and adjusting on a pretty regular basis. I see a question. Yes.
Yeah, if I may, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I bet you're going to answer that question next. I'm just wondering if staff have the flexibility to be able to lower rates to fill ramps and get people off the street. Because this whole drama about increasing fees for parking downtown, which I support, on street, we should then maybe, if we want to have people in these ramps that are built and sitting empty, we might want to consider lowering the rates in the ones that aren't full in order to get people off the street, not just to make more money, but really to encourage people to go where it's less expensive. So I'm wondering, I know a long time ago we determined that whoever was the head of parking services would make that decision, and I totally support that. Just wondering if that's coming into your thinking. If we're at 60%, we want to be at 80%, why don't we drop the price?
Thank you, Madam President, Councilmember Goodman. There's no universal formula, but there is some guidelines that help us think about this. The first thing we try and do is make parking available on street, and that drives the pricing first. So we want on-street parking to be available for people who need it. And if the demand is too high and it's occupied 90% of the time, we're not really serving people. And so we have to create more incentive for the turnover, first and foremost. And pricing can help do that. And duration helps do that. It's not just about the pricing, it's pricing and duration. We really encourage people that if they're parking for a long time to park in a ramp. And that gets more to your question about how we price the ramps. Let's take Hoff, for example. If we reduced the rates at Hoff, it wouldn't make a difference. It's already very, very full. We can't handle it. If we took ramp A, perhaps that could be an area where we could look at, if we reduce that, do we incentivize people to park in ramp A and to walk? And yes, currently we have the authority to adjust the rates to manage the system in a holistic way. I skipped to the next slide because it also addresses some parking, and that starts with the parking meters. Really, since we've gone to the pay stations and to the app, we just seen a drop in complaints about parking. And continuing on with transportation operations and mobility, sign repairs, I think we do a pretty good job out there being responsive when we hear of problems. On streetlight cases, we had to dig into this one a little bit and try and understand why we would see a drop in 2017, and we think it's because the 311, it was difficult to distinguish a streetlight problem versus a car hit a street pole problem. And to us, they're very different solutions. So we, in 2017, pulled out the car hit the streetlight and put it in a different category. So it may reflect an artificial drop in the number of complaints. I also think that if we come back, we don't have 2018, but 2019, I would anticipate that we'll see an increase in the feedback that we get about streetlights with the conversion to LED and what the response has been there. On traffic signals, we are doing very well on meeting our service level. I want to note that these generally come in as timing. This not enough green time, can I get a left arrow? When we have emergencies, if a signal is black or a signal is on flasher, we get out there right away and fix it. There is no service level, but to fix it immediately. Our next largest category is in drinking water, our water supply. We provide safe drinking water, about 80 million gallons a day, to the city of Minneapolis and our 6 wholesale customers. It's an extremely important part of the public works effort and business. Our rates are very comparable to our peer cities. We keep our rates, I want to say that we keep them steady. What we don't want is fluctuating utility rates so that our residents do not know, our customers do not know what to expect. So we try to take a 10-year look at what our capital and operational needs are and keep the rates as steady as possible so that people know what to expect. We do have very large projects, very large capital projects in this program area, and the public doesn't feel that large project because we have it spread out over time. When we have feedback or issues with taste or odor, it comes in as a water quality issue. Over the last few years, we have dropped in the number of issues coming through 311, and we respond to complaints within 3 business days, between 99 and 100% of the time. This is a good graph. When we've got a water main break, we are out there as quickly as we can to assess the situation. This chart doesn't mean that we have resolved all of the water main breaks within 99% or 99% of the time within a business day, but we usually, within a business day, have a plan and have communicated back what that plan is. Water main breaks are a result of numerous things. Aging infrastructure, as we know, we've got very old infrastructure out there, but also weather and soil conditions can play a role in this. We've got a spike here. We're looking into why that happened. It could easily have been a very quick thaw or a very quick freeze that could lead to issues with water main breaks. And lastly, as we receive complaints about water service issues, we are able to resolve that very quickly within a business day, either resolve or have a plan within one business day. Okay, totally switching gears. Our next largest program area is in transportation maintenance. One of the measures that we use is how quickly we can get back to full parking. And this isn't necessarily about the parking. This is about how quickly we can finish up our snow emergency operation and return to normalcy. That's very disruptive for us to call a snow emergency, and we want to know that we're completing the work and we're back to normal operations as quickly as we can for our public. We work pretty hard at this, and I think that it shows that we are generally on target for that. There is no surprise here as we look at snow and ice cases. This is related to the streets, that we have quite a spike in 18 and 19 that captures this year's information. So with the February snowfall, we saw quite a few complaints on snow and ice come in, and we really hung in there on our responsiveness. This is the result of crews working 12 to 12-hour back-to-back shifts for about a month to make sure that we had no break in service. And you have all thanked the staff in so many ways and so appropriately, and they really feel it. Thank you very much, and it shows here.
If I may, Councilmember Fletcher and then Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. If we can go back to the previous slide, I'm trying to understand what that actually means, because don't we, during a snow emergency, have parking limitations for 36 hours? So what's the 9-hour return to full parking?
If we, at the end of the snow emergency, we are ready to reopen the snow emergencies and the side streets to parking as it is before we do the snow emergency. If we are behind schedule, if we are not able to complete our work in time, we're not able to restore, that would be the third day, we're not able to restore the parking, then it means that we haven't hit the 3-day mark on our operation.
So this is 9 hours above the 36 hours? Or? And I'm trying to, or what's the maximum number? I'm just not understanding what the graphic shows, and especially in relationship to going to a winter parking where we weren't restoring full parking for like a month at a time. I'm just trying to understand what this data is telling me.
So I think this is correct, but I may need to find some additional information and provide it back to you. But as our last day is ending, it's overnight. He can explain it? Okay, I'm going to ask Mike Kennedy, and I said, I probably can handle anything that comes up, but I can't. So I'm going to ask Director Kennedy to assist with this response. I was not prepared for this question. I'm prepared for a lot of questions, not this one.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Council Member. This is about each day, each phase. Each phase is a 12-hour phase in a snow emergency. So it's about day 1, day 2, and day 3. It's not about the total. So essentially each phase is a 12-hour thing from 8 to 8, 8 to 8. And that's what these numbers are saying. We're saying back in 13 and 14, on average, it took us 10.5 hours to restore, to be done enough to call off the tow trucks and restore the parking to the public. because of the fact that since 2004, the rules say that you can park after we're done plowing. Prior to that, it had said that the parking restrictions are on for the full 12 hours. This is to show that how quickly we're getting the parking back, that important parking back to the public.
If I may. And so this is showing succeeding in less than the 12 hours that was indicated. And I guess it must be measuring success maybe differently than some of my constituents certainly did when they were calling about snow removal, right? Where if the parking's actually not restored to full parking, because you can never park on a street, or to park in a street, you've got to be out in the bike lane or out in a lane of traffic because the snow's encroached further and further on the street. It feels like in many ways I would not give us credit for ever having gotten there on several of the snowstorms. So I guess I'm curious how we're counting the data.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Fletcher, we know that we can't get all the cars out of the way. We know that the streets encroach. This is simply about time in each of those phases to give the parking back. Yes, it might be less and less parking over the season and that sort of thing. I mean, also to be clear, this doesn't mean we're done plowing. We might be still running the routes, doing mop-up and things like that. This is just about when we say, okay, we can't tow anymore, we're not going to tow anymore. Everybody can move back to parking on the streets, to what extent that is.
Thanks.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Hutchison, for thanking us for thanking you. However, I mean, I really think that the ultimate thanks goes to you and your staff for keeping our city moving and functioning through a very difficult past winter, and for all the seasons that Public Works keeps the city of Minneapolis moving. I wanted to, go back to parking a little bit, and we are just having these significant challenges with commercial vehicles, particularly over the road 18-wheeler trucks, parking in neighborhoods, on side streets, on major thoroughfares, blocking sight lines, creating safety concerns. I'm just curious, what is your department thinking about this issue?
Madam President, Councilmember Jenkins, this began with a single ward issue and grew to 2, then 3, then 4 wards that we know about now that are experiencing issues with large trucks parking overnight in neighborhoods. When it was a single or 2, we were thinking we should pilot some things. We may still choose to do that. But recently I placed a meeting notice on your calendar to bring all of the affected wards together and talk about more about if there's a citywide approach that we need to take and what that could look like, and get your feedback. So I think it's a growing problem, and one that we should address both on a spot basis as well as, I'm looking over here, this is one of the affected wards as well, both on a spot basis for some short-term relief, but probably do a better job of it on a more comprehensive basis from the citywide policy. So we want to bring you together and have a conversation about that, and I believe that's in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, my sole purpose for mentioning it is to make the full council aware, because I'm not sure if it's happening in other parts of the city. Well, I know it's happening in some other parts of the city, but not everywhere in the city, and it's I think it's an issue that we all need to be concerned about, because it impacts how traffic moves throughout our city.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you for that question, Council Vice President Jenkins. I'm pretty sure I was like that one ward and then it expanded, because it is atrocious in the 4th ward, the semi-truck parking and the amount of hazards that it creates, because they also park along roads that people drive really fast down, and so it blocks vision as well as adding danger and pollution. So I'm really grateful for the citywide approach to it, because what essentially we would be doing is just displacing the problem, so moving it from Ward 4 to Ward 5 or Ward 1. Like, we would just be bouncing it around throughout the city. So I think a comprehensive approach is a really good idea, and I'm grateful for that. Do you have data, because I know this is citywide, but do you have disaggregated data about the snow and ice cases in the potholes based on wards?
President Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, we have 311 data disaggregated to the point, actually, which means to the ward. I don't believe the results team has done an analysis with that, but the raw data does exist.
Okay. Yeah, I think I was curious about like the service levels around it, because I think that, well, I know that we had a really snowy year, but I also feel that probably a disproportionate amount of that increase in complaints probably came from my ward. As I've mentioned before during budget hearings, I have a very vocal ward. But I think that there's a bit of a story that's carried throughout history that in North Minneapolis, we get lower levels of service. And so in comparison to the rest of the city, and the amount of advocacy and conversations I've had, I've just have found that to not necessarily be true. And so I think it would just be really helpful for us to be able to see that data. I don't know if you have like the, like, because it's at 85% here, is it 76% in North Minneapolis, or is it 87? To be able to have that story so that we are able to really, I think it's important for building trust in particular, because the truth is that my community does not trust that the city cares about North Minneapolis, and that is just a story that is stuck for a long time. And in my experience thus far in the city, like I said, I haven't necessarily seen that to be true. And so I think it would be helpful for us to be able to figure out how to use those numbers to be able to reflect back, like, no, the city is investing as much time in Ward 4 as they are in Ward 8 or another ward throughout the city.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Cunningham, thank you for recognizing our work. And it's a great suggestion, and we will reach out to the results team to see if we could provide some disaggregate. We'd be happy to show this. We're really confident that we provide same great or not great level of service citywide. Love us or hate us, it's citywide. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I am going to move on. Yes?
Yeah, if I may take you back just a couple of steps. In the slide that it shows that we consistently for the past several years have gotten a 12-hour plow done in 9 hours, I'm just curious, does that mean that we should maybe, is there an opportunity to shorten our snow emergencies since we consistently finish before 12 hours, or do we want that kind of extra margin of error? I do know that after things are plowed, of course, then cars can immediately park on the street anyway. But I'm just curious to your thoughts about that based on this graph.
Chair Palmisano, I think it could be difficult to do that and coordinate it with the shifts that we have that arrive for muster at a certain time and get sent out. I don't know that we would more quickly start the next one, the next phase, by ending the previous phase a few hours earlier. Perhaps the way we think about it is we can offer a few hours of additional relief if we finish it early. It is something that we could think about and see if we could make adjustments. I'd want to go even further back in history and make sure that it was as consistent as it has been since 14 and 15.
Thank you.
Oh, I skipped. Okay, let's talk about sidewalks. Starting with structural cases, this is more of the summertime work, trip and fall hazards that come into us. We are able to respond at a pretty high level, 63%, but not always able to resolve the complaints within 7 days. I think the reason for this is that those particular crews are doing a multitude of different tasks around the city, and the sidewalk may not always be the highest priority for a particular crew or task, and we have to look at sort of criticality of the work and where our crews are assigned that day. The second graph I know is of interest to the council and to the budget committee, and that is our snow and ice cases, specifically on sidewalks. There's a little bit of a story to tell here with the drop and the increase. 2 years ago, I in true to Hutchison form, I said I want to do something fast. We're going to make a fast change here. No more inspection when we get a complaint. Just get out there. Just skip that step. We're going to cut 3 days off our process. We're cutting 3 days off the process. This turned out, as you'll see when we do a broader update on this, not to be the best idea, but it was something I wanted to try to see if we could speed up the process. The 311 results are a little, they don't reflect this change that we made. So that drop, what it's saying is that we didn't inspect, we only inspected 32% within 4 business days, but really we stopped inspecting. We started just issuing. So that's why there's a drop, because somewhere in that season, we stopped inspecting right away in favor of going faster on issuing the notice and getting to resolution faster. So that's why you see the drop. The more interesting story, I think, is that in 18 and 19, we started the proactive inspection. And actually, resulting in 18 when we made the change, when it went faster, the process went faster, and then beginning 18-19, we did the proactive inspection. Even as the complaints increased, big snow year, our response increased. And so to me, I feel like there's promise in this proactive inspection that we're doing, and we're looking forward to hopefully expanding that for next year.
A question for you, Director Hutchison. One of the things is we got numerous complaints into our office of, fees for snow removal of things that perhaps it seemed pretty obvious from pictures that they showed us, and I know there's an appeals process for this, but where perhaps they cleared their sidewalk, but then a snowplow pushed the snow, usually on an arterial street. It's usually a county plow that's blowing the snow back onto someone's sidewalk. I appreciate that there's an appeals process, but when I would be able to go and look at complaints, I did notice that usually the people that were registering complaints to our offices were people who had had multiple complaints over the past couple of years to their property for snow and ice complaints. So in this data that you're showing, the 311 snow and ice cases, are these discrete properties, or are these total number of instances? Because I feel like several of the ones that I've personally looked at, that handful, have several incidents to one address.
Chair Palmisano, that's an excellent question that I don't have an answer to, and I would have to ask the results team how they pulled together the 311. I don't know if it's the number. Is Anna? This is the number of instances from Anna. So this is so it could be repeat in here.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the complaints that I had a lot in my during this winter season was of mail carriers being injured trying to navigate unplowed unshoveled sidewalks. I'm curious as to how do we get out there to be able to help prevent this sort of issue, because I know that I think this may have been citywide, because I remember reading that there were issues of staff shortages because of so many injuries that were happening on the job, and it was something that we heard quite frequently in my office. So how can we ensure greater safety for the folks who literally have to walk the sidewalks every single day and maybe can't wait that 4 or 21 days?
Chair Palmisano and Councilmember Cunningham, that's an interesting piece of information that I think is like a harbinger piece of information for all people who travel on the sidewalk. If it's difficult for the mail carriers, it's probably difficult for everyone who needs to get around and walk around. We think that we need to expand our sidewalk snow clearing program and are looking forward to seeing if we can increase the proactive inspection because I think it's very promising. And we're also examining some potential other ways that we can help our partners and residents help us keep sidewalks clear.
Councilmember Fletcher?
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. So I understand why it was your instinct to try to shorten from 7 to 4 days. I'm struggling to think about how even 4 days is an SLA that tells us much in terms of responding to snow, because so much of the time, if you call and report something, but 4 days later it snowed again, there's other stuff going on. I mean, it just feels like we miss a lot of enforcement, and I think that it calls a lot of questions for me about whether we're getting an accurate picture of what's really going on. And certainly I know a lot of people who sort of stop calling 311 because they don't feel like that, like 4 days isn't going to get them there. So I would encourage us to think about, as we're thinking about expanding the program, how do we get to a response that actually does something for us within weather cycles?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher, yes. 311 data, where we are this year really digging into the accuracy of the data that comes in. And there is more work and research to understand how 311 is a tool. One of the reasons we started proactive inspection is because we shouldn't wait for the report. We should go out and look, and that will speed us up a lot.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I'm curious around the structural sidewalks, and how do we work with utilities and other auxiliary entities that permit with us to do work underground and then disrupt our sidewalks? Is there a process for that?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Jenkins, there is a process for that. We of course issue the permit for utility to do work in the right-of-way. When there is a utility cut, the city will repair it because it needs to be up to our standard. We have a pretty long backlog right now of utility repairs. And in fact, it plays a little bit into why the sidewalk number's at 63 is because the same crews will be repairing the utility cuts citywide as might be repairing a sidewalk panel. We can trace it all the way back to $1 billion of investment in the city, means that there's a lot of cuts that need to be repaired. So we're trying to work through that backlog as quickly as we can.
Thank you. One more question on snow and ice. Since 2012, Public Works snow and ice control has gone $2 to $3 million over budget during years with heavier snow, with a similar effect then on your general fund budget. And so since the mayor is here and is charged with establishing a budget, I'm just curious, does budget pressure cause resource challenges for your performance measures here? Could you speak to that?
Chair Palmisano, that's a great question. Somebody smarter than me before I got here determined that the best way to manage for such an unknown of how much snow falls in a year is to budget for the average over 5 years. So what you see in our budget is the average of the last 5 years, what we've needed to spend. When we have extraordinary cases such as this past winter, we know that we're going to be over that number, but we've planned to be either over that number because we're budgeting on the average, not on the maximum or the minimum. We work closely with budget. They agree with this approach, and we do not have to pull resources from elsewhere in the Public Works budget. We often actually have revenue that will help offset that, which is great news. But we work with the budget office to be sure that we can do what's needed for our city and not fear that we will, run out of Public Works budget.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions.
Okay, we are on to solid waste and recycling. The diversion rate is an important measure of how we're doing our work. Our goal was set at 50% diversion. So that is the percent that's either recycled or composted. We are not there. We have reached 37% diversion. We've had a question, is 50% the right goal? There's a perhaps we would want to pull the goal down. I'm not ready to do that because goals are meant to be aspirational, and I want to see how much we can do to get there. There's a few steps that we've taken. One is we haven't reached the goal. We have a zero waste plan, and that plan drove us to put out a survey to our customers to say, what would make you do more? We have the results of that survey back. We're using that to try to hone in on what our next step should be. What's the appetite for certain things? I mean, certain ideas include rate changes. Certain ideas include every other pickup. Certain ideas. So we want to know the appetite before we really flesh out what kind of resources the city needs to invest to get to 50%. And that's where we are in the process right now.
Councilmember Schrader.
Well, I'd just encourage you to get that data out. I think, at least myself, I'm very interested in that and finding out what else, because I am hearing from constituents who would say they would prefer to have, they would love to flip the have recycling every week and garbage pickup once a week, or every other week, just to give you an example.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Schrader, actually all of the council members would be happy to share the results of that survey with you. It's pretty interesting information.
I don't see other questions. May I ask the budgetary implication of potentially reaching our waste diversion goal or getting to that next level? Do you suggest that that might be primarily borne on the ratepayers?
Chair Palmisano, I don't know yet. That is one model, but that's not the only model, and we need to explore a couple of different ideas before we can say exactly where that money comes from or even how much we would need.
Thank you.
Next topic is graffiti cases. This is completed out of solid waste and recycling. We have quite a number of graffiti cases reported. I've received some questions from some council members about this information, this data. We are doing well on having graffiti abated within 20 days, and according to Director Herberholz, we do most of that within 7 days. So we're pleased with the ability to reach the service level. This is something that we have to work in partnership again with community members, because when there's graffiti on private property, we will issue a warning to remove the graffiti, and we find that most people can take care of it. And when that doesn't happen, then we will remove the graffiti, because it's really important to keep a clean city and charge back to the resident.
Councilmember Cunningham?
I'm sure you're expecting my question. Well, I just wanted to be able to speak in front of folks about it. So on the research around this, some out of San Diego and some other cities, that 24 to 48 hours of abatement of graffiti is ideal for a couple of reasons. The first is perception of crime, but then also it essentially is claiming land as turf and therefore can increase the incidence of turf wars. And so it's kind of like when just moving about the community, it's like that just doesn't feel good to see your community land being fought over in that way. So where is there space? Like, how can we get to that 24 to 48 hours? And I know that that's maybe a bigger question than right now, but that's just something that I pose for us to take into consideration, because that is the best practice, and I know it can take up to 20 days. And then I think the second piece is it common for graffiti to be abated through the public works solid waste department, or is that something that typically is done through either the police department or regulatory services in other cities?
Vice Chair Fletcher, yes, and Councilmember Cunningham. First question, thank you for your comment. We're going to give that some thought. Second question, it is common for solid waste and recycling because we have the tools to take care of the problem. I think that other agencies within the city could be helpful in certain pieces of that, certainly regulatory services and identifying the problems, but we are able to solve the problem, and I think that's why it lives within this program.
One other thing that I'll just share as an idea to take into consideration is that I've seen other cities that leverage neighborhood associations to have a graffiti abatement team at the neighborhood association. So just thinking about how can we maybe help supply neighborhood associations / incentivize, just kind of throwing that out there for consideration as we explore deeper into that.
Vice Chair Fletcher, Councilmember Cunningham, I just verified. I believe we have that program. I don't know that we're fully leveraging it. I don't know. Dave Herberholz, would you like to come and answer, please? Thank you. I call Dave Herberholz up.
Committee Chair, Councilmember Cunningham, we actively go out, in fact, our Clean City group to the police stations, in fact, and promote the use of solvents and the materials that are needed for residents to abate graffiti. So, and we work with neighborhood associations also if they elect to get more aggressive in that approach. But primarily it's done through the police precincts. In fact, I think we've got representatives at Precinct 4 today. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much.
Fleet. We're measuring fleet here by the availability to our internal customers. So we provide fleet to the entire city, and we have available vehicles. This is a measure of vehicle availability for those who need it. To me, this is also very much a measure of how our operation is running, because if we have staff parts service performed and our internal fleet function is working well, then we've got vehicles available. There's a few other things that we're working with here in terms of measurement that are not fully fleshed out and therefore not a part of this, but we'd like to take more of a look at emissions. We know emissions increased last year, and we're trying to dig into why. Is it because we're doing more work out there? Is there more driving? Is there more driving than there should be? And we are looking at all of those things as we're doing our work on the effort to green the fleet. I believe there are a few questions about fleet as well.
Any questions from my colleagues about fleet? I know that others have asked how Public Works is done with its stated goal of moving to a green fleet, like what's going well and what isn't.
I have good notes for this one. Chair Palmisano, we're ramping up on the green fleet. We started a few years ago with some pilots on some vehicles to see if they would work for the work that we do and other departments, the work that they do. Things that are going well, we have a grant from MPCA to install charging stations at the Hiawatha facility. We're going to be installing 10 level 2 charging stations at the East Side Maintenance Facility. We have approval from, of the sneeze, not a comment. We have approval from the PUC to install the infrastructure for up to 70 level 2 charging stations at the Federal Ramp, at Aldrich, and the Fridley campus. And then the city will come in and install that charging. We've ordered 5 new Chevy Bolts, and we are seeing a shift in attitudes. More departments are excited about this. We have a little ways to go. There are some who are doubtful that a electric vehicle will serve all their needs, but we're going to keep doing the education. So all that's going really well. I will say too that even a few years ago, there was a charge to buy more EVs, and then we've quickly discovered we have no place to plug them in. So this first big round of effort is getting the infrastructure ready for more electric vehicles. Things that have not gone so well is that the market is not as good as you would hope for some categories, like the small SUVs that are necessary for some of the field work we do. It's not a great market for purchase, and that's a little bit of a hindrance. The older vehicles that we have are being kept in service for a longer period of time, and that's somewhat seasonal. So we've got many employees that use vehicles only in the summer. They prefer to come back to that vehicle, and I think that we need to take a harder look at that. And then some city employees, again, they don't really want they don't want a Bolt. You know, it's just not cool. So we're working to change the perception of that. And in fact, we have one of them, Public Works, so that we can fully test it. We load equipment, survey stuff. We drove it in the winter. I try and take it out sometimes. Brett is like, sometimes he monopolizes it, it's just using it all the time, making sure how it works. And Al certainly is using it. So we're really trying to demonstrate that these vehicles can really work for a variety of our uses.
Thank you. Councilmember Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What about electrical vehicle infrastructure? How is that thought being sort of rolled out?
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Jenkins, we have to divide it into two pieces. The first piece is what the city does for the city fleet. And everything that I just listed, all those charging stations, that's the infrastructure that we're investing in so that we can add electric vehicles to our fleet and be able to plug them in and charge them. The second part of it is the public's electric vehicle fleet. A lot of the charging happens at home or when people get to work, but there's also some public charging that is desired. We started to look at what happens on the curbside for charging, and we'd like to look at that in greater depth. I mean, it requires some infrastructure, it requires running electricity, it requires, carving out a couple spaces where and how that happens. And as part of this, a lot of work we're doing on what happens on the curb, we feel like we need to look at our options there too.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Keep going, yes? Yep. Okay. Transportation Planning, Design, and Engineering is our next program.
As you get into this, I do want to note for my colleagues that I can't currently find the chief of the fire department to ask him whether he wants to move to next time or not. If we can keep enough people here, then my inclination would be to go ahead and have this because it prevents us from needing to schedule more time as a council. But we'll just see if you could kind of consider that and signal to me whether or not you could stay a little bit later. And hopefully Chief Frito is here somewhere. So thanks. Sorry.
It's okay. This next slide is really a measure of Vision Zero. I wish we put a big old Vision Zero logo on here. Our goal, this is an important departmental priority that we put forward, is to get to 0 fatalities and serious injuries on our streets within the next 10 years. I love that we're measuring this. We're going to keep measuring it. We're going to measure it in disaggregate form, by neighborhood, by corridor, by gender, by race. We have a lot of measurement going on here. And I will just say that over time, we should see this curve. We will see this curve go down with our efforts on Vision Zero.
Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Do we have 2018 data?
We do not yet have 2018. Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher, we do not yet have 2018 data. It comes from the Department of Public Safety, so there's a gap. We might have some, but not in the result. Nah, not yet. Okay.
And remind me, when did we launch Vision Zero?
With the leadership of the City Council, who made this happen, it was about 2017, late 2016, 2017.
So we don't have data that reflects Vision Zero yet? Okay.
Chair Palmisano, Councilmember Fletcher, We don't have the data to see if we've made progress over the last year yet. We have historical data that tells us where we are today.
Thanks.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Hutchinson, I just wanted to say that in my ward we've had a handful of fatalities, car-related fatalities over just the past few months. Can you just explain a little bit more about what efforts are being taken in order to be able to address these concerns? And because a lot of folks are like, we need more enforcement, and enforcement is one aspect of it, but it's also an unsustainable aspect. We can't just have police cars posted up on every corner where people are running stop signs or stoplights, or speeding. So could you explain a little bit more about what that work is, so we can have that out in the open?
Chair Palmisano and Councilmember Cunningham, let me start by saying that no fatality is acceptable on our street. When there is a fatality, Interim Director Mosing behind me gets the report as quickly as possible, and even when there's an injury, when there's a crash on our street, we investigate why it happened and what we could do in the short term, because sometimes short-term action is necessary, and we need to understand what happened, and that comes through the crash report. Then I want to say that Vision Zero has been successful in so many other cities, because it really says that there isn't just one thing to do. There's a whole set of things that you have to do, and it's design, it's communications, and specifically communications about personal responsibility. It's enforcement in a very culturally sensitive way, and it's legislation. And those are four key pillars of the work that we're doing in Vision Zero.
Thank you so much. It's so important in North Minneapolis, and I know that I've heard from my colleagues that this is a persistent issue throughout the city, is that, we have some serious, driving on our streets is very unsafe. And so between being able to lower the speed limits, hopefully we'll be able to get that to be a thing. And then with Vision Zero, and then thinking about enforcement from a policing standpoint, hopefully we'll be able to really get to some of these routes. So thank you.
You're all by now fans of the Pavement Condition Index, which is one of the bases of the 20-year streets funding plan. We track this pretty carefully. Every 3 years we need to collect more data and see how we're doing. We have made improvement since we started this 20-year streets funding plan. We are able to reverse some of the trends of the recession, some of the trends of the cutback in local government assistance, to reinvest in our streets. And every time we reinvest in a street, our Complete Streets policy kicks in, and not only are we making a better street for the community, we're making it more complete. This criteria is only half of the basis of how we select streets. The other half is equity focused. Equity, giving weight to areas of racially concentrated areas of poverty, and giving weight to where we have modal imbalances, both equity criteria.
Director, let me just ask a question from an optimistic perspective. If we, in the next few years, get some level of additional funding, whether through a statewide gas tax or something like that for our roads and paving programs, how will we consider that extra amount of money in light of our 20-year parks and paving program? What are your thoughts on that? Would that also get factored in the same way that you are currently prioritizing our roads 20-year agreement?
Chair Palmisano, yes, we would. We feel like the balanced criteria of both condition and equity is important for the city and in line with our city's commitment to equity. Depending on the stream and how it comes in, we may have certain rules to follow with it, in which case we'll be true to those rules. But it would be our intent to run it through our city's process to really bring the equity into the evaluation.
Thank you. Are there any further comments or questions from my colleagues? Nope. With that, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Thank you for,
Great.
Sorry, there's a couple more slides that
We got work to do on mode share. I'm going to measure it over time. This is just work mode. This is just work. We actually want to be looking at all trips, but we really should be increasing our mode share for walking and biking and transit. Stormwater collection and treatment, big effort with our partners here. We take responsibility along with MWMO and with all of our water managers to reduce the number of impairments in our rivers and streams. And there's nothing more important than a safe workplace for all of our employees. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for all of your effort. I don't see any questions in queue. We do have fire here, and as long as we can keep us here, I have asked the chief to go ahead and present. I do understand if people have to leave and go. Our committee did officially end at 4, so I appreciate if people need to leave, but I'm going to move and invite up Chief Friedel to go ahead and join us. If before we do, if I could just do the motion to formally receive and file the reports that we did receive today. So that's Police, the City Attorney's Office, and Public Works for now. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Welcome, Chief Friedel, for the last presentation of the day.
Said best for last. Madam Chair, committee members, again, I'm John Friedel, proud to say I'm the Chief of the Minneapolis Fire Department, and thank you for the opportunity for me to come up and share some of the results. I'll go through fairly quickly with some of the slides, and then I just want to make sure we save time for questions you might have, and follow up that can send up later date if we have to do that also. So starting over the performance summary like everybody has today, it's still pretty simple that we've had for the last 5 years. We still have the same budget programs. We have fire suppression, EMS, technical rescue, training and recruitment, and community risk reduction and outreach. Most of the trends you see on the right-hand side, we've been fairly flat. There has been a little bit of a change in our response times, which I'll talk about certainly in future slides coming up. Enterprise, in the enterprise, second page of the enterprise priorities, workforce diversity, and our spending with diverse suppliers. We have been meeting and exceeding the enterprise goal of spending with diverse suppliers. We have a very diverse group of suppliers that we use. We try to spread that around a little bit if we can. It's hard. When you're buying big red fire trucks, that's more challenging than buying smaller goods that we use every day and we consume in our stations. Our workforce diversity, that is challenging. We are still a little under where we need to be, but we are making some fairly responsible strides in trying to improve that, and we will continue to do so, and I'll talk about that in future slides. One of those priorities, obviously, is our EMS Academy that we have our 4th cohort that's just started here a few weeks ago. In 2018, the classes have been primarily made up of 74, 75, maybe more percent persons of color and 40% female. So we're starting to build the crop of future firefighters that we could potentially hire in that Pathways program. It's been something we really appreciate, and it's been really successful for us. On the right of the page, when you talk about our separations, since I've been back as chief, we have replaced almost 42% of our department. And I've had the privilege of promoting 234 people. So when you start combining those numbers, over the last 5 years, there's no one in our departments that's in the same position they were 5 years ago, which has its own unique challenges. And we've had a lot of very senior, a lot of very experienced people have wonderful careers and now leave and retired. So there's a lot of unique challenges for us in terms of career development and maintaining. We do that with our young people now, and so it's created some other challenges for us that we're continuing to work on. But it's also a unique opportunity to take a bunch of really young folks and mold them the way you want them to do, and really kind of mold your department. It's an exciting time. I wish I had more time to spend with the exciting time. Another 20 years would be great, but I probably want to see that. But it's been a really exciting time for us. On page 5, with our majority of our events, again, our calls for service, in 2018, we were at 45,000 events. It has been trending upward, and some of these numbers, I'll be honest with you, I question a little bit, depending how you define your queries. And I didn't see how the queries are all defined. I'd probably define some of them differently. I think that we're probably a little more than that, because I think we're seeing different types of runs that we're responding on. For example, picking up sharps. We are a lot of times picking up sharps, and we're doing it all over. It's almost daily. And I don't know if that's appropriately getting tracked in our system to be able to pull that data out. So I think there's a lot of things that we're doing, something similar to that is certainly changing some things. But we are, obviously, we have a lot of EMS and medical calls. About 67%, or actually more than that, probably 75% of what we do is in EMS. With these runs going up, you can see in 2014 where we're at 40,000 runs a year, and since then now we're up to, we've got as high as 49,000 in 2016, and we're hovering around that 46,000 run a year number. That has, when we get above that 40,000, that is putting us in a unique challenge, which speaks a little bit to our change that we've seen in our response time. At 40 or 41,000 runs a year, that puts us right where we need to be, where we can effectively respond. What happens, we start getting up into 45, 49,000 runs a year, we start having to substitute rigs. In other words, one station's out, now another rig has to come in to take care of that run in and around their station, which creates a long response time. So a lot of things that are driving our little change in response time that I'm going to keep reflecting back on as I go through these slides. And the next slide in particular, and here it is, we can see where in 2014 at 40,000 runs, we were at 92% efficiency, above the standard. Now at 46 to 49,000, we're starting to drop off a little bit. And now you factor in the one-sided street parking and the winters we've had last few years, the training that we have to do, rigs out of position. There's a lot of things that influence and affect our response time. I do think it's higher than that. I think we're very consistent around 85 to 86%. I think that's where the number will come in at. I am going to re-query this and see and pull that data, and I'd like to supply that information to you in an update if we can at a later date, because I do think I listen to these runs all the time. I know how long it's taking us to get to these addresses, and we are doing better than that, and I can almost assure you of that. What happens with a lot of this, as we get busier and we start substituting rigs, it does take longer when we're sending more to a different part of town. It just takes longer to get there. And then again, back to the winter when we had to request to go to one-side street parking, and that's always a tough request for me to make because I know it challenges this city when we do that. But this year in particular, we had a heck of a time getting some streets we couldn't get down. We were almost creeping to make sure we didn't hit cars on either side of the street. So it's very, very challenging. Maps on the following page shows our EMS. I wanted to put these in here just to show you in 2007 the demand for service, what it looked like in 2007, especially in EMS, and what it looks like in 2018. It has certainly changed dramatically in our EMS and the demand for our service. That's why I say I think we're closer, probably 75% of what we do is associated in and around EMS, which makes it very challenging. Now you can start to see the number of runs we do have when I've got other rigs trying to backfill for another rig. It is going to have impact to our response time. There's no doubt that is going to be challenging, but and that's why we're working on our EMS piece, and I'll update you as best I can in the future slides about where we're going with EMS in the future.
Chief,
yes.
Could you tell us a little bit more what you think is impacting the growth of that red zone across our city? So this is a map that shows a 10-year difference, but this was the map that really struck me. Do you suspect that the majority of them are medical calls?
Yes, majority of our medical calls. I think what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of things. There's a lot, and we all know the healthcare system is struggling right now in the country. It is in a lot of different ways. But I think we're seeing an aging population. I think we're seeing a lot of folks who are maybe disconnected to effective healthcare, and they're not really sure. They get home and they're a little afraid, they're a little intimidated, or they don't really quite honestly know where to go, and they'll just dial up 911, and then we're coming and we're going to assist them. And a lot of times they get into the system, I think and they're back out of that revolving door. And that's, I think, where we need to come in to play a broader role in that. And it gets into the care coordination piece. And I think once we can get involved and really that we can get them directed once they go, that they really receive the care that they really truly need to address some of the needs they have. There are many, many needs that are challenging the EMS system, and that's just some of the few, in my opinion.
And Police Chief Arredondo spoke a lot about the increase in overdoses. Do you respond? Would this include all of the overdose data as well?
Yes, those include some of those. To date, we're at, since we started carrying Narcan, we're at over 750? Approximately. 750 responses, which is dramatic. And where we started this back in 2014, because I started hearing some runs, and we said, do we need to think about this? And then we decided, let's go for it. I didn't want to be seen as enabling and the problem, you know what I mean? I wanted to try to fix it. Well, then we started carrying Narcan, got the training, investing in it, and then it just it has just exploded over the last 5 years. It has just gone. It's just as an extreme problem for us. We are going to continue to respond and help as many as we can. You know, in terms of the EMS piece, for example, we just met last week with my EMS coordinator with the MCDA housing folks in the city and all their social workers. Now, they have 4,000 people living in those buildings, and they suffer from the full wide gamut of different issues. But a lot of those are going into a hospital setting, turning right back around, coming back home, and in a matter of days and sometimes hours, they're going right back into that same setting. So we are going to, work with all the social workers in those buildings to try to identify some of those and help try to get them connected to the care that they need through the services that they can provide, that the social workers have access to, and identify those people and work with those. So we're going to share the information fairly quickly now with all of our crews that have buildings in their districts, so they can actually connect and start helping some of the folks who are so challenged in a lot of cases in finding effective, affordable health care.
And just a follow-up to that. So just the protocol, and I'm sorry to ask such a simplistic question, but the protocol, despite our police officers carrying Narcan, would be that any overdose call, fire would also respond to. Is that correct?
We haven't queried that. We haven't queried that. I know that they're responding a lot. I could just ask my EMS coordinator if we aren't dual respond. Some we do respond on, but not necessarily all of them.
Does not respond on all quote-unquote overdoses, because not every overdose is
associated to opioid.
I see.
So it gets a little bit, I would say that sometimes we probably both respond, but a majority on, for sure, opioid, we definitely respond, but then we also respond to other overdose calls. So it's just a combination. That's why it's so important for us to do an effective patient assessment, to really try to identify what is the ongoing issue and what are we trying to deal with here.
Based off of the information that the dispatchers are receiving.
That's correct.
Over the phone, and what type of response.
So it's a crazy situation that we're in with this, trying to deal with this, and it certainly has changed now with a lot of the over-counter Narcan that folks have, and they have their own, and so they administer their own, and then sometimes things don't go as well as they think, and then that changes that response also.
Thank you.
Training and recruitment. This is one area that we have certainly tried to make some strides in. And just in terms of dealing with some of the ethnicity issues we have in our department. Historically, years ago, we were very, very diverse, and I'm happy to say that a lot of that diversity has had a 25, 30-year career and are now retired. So now we're going to pick up the pace on that. But even with that, our chief officer ranks at this point right now are 26% persons of color, and we're over 25% female in our chief officer rank. So we're doing an effective job of developing these young officers, but we have some challenges in the future. We've gotten very young, and this is going to change a lot. This is going to change dramatically. We have gotten very, very young. We have changed a lot of things in what we do and how we do them in terms of For example, when it comes to not only the success of the EMS Academy, but just in our hiring process, we eliminated the written exam, for example, coming on this job, just to try to eliminate as many barriers as we could. So we don't no longer have a written exam to come on to the fire department to be a firefighter, but their applications are ranked. We did a nationwide webinar on Good Friday, and I think we had 241 individuals listening to that webinar, and that was from across the country. Krista Guzman is not here, who led the webinar, and her and I, since that webinar, we have taken calls from all over the country with other cities and departments calling in saying, now, how did you do this? How are you having that success? We talked about the successes we have, so I think we're on the right track here. It is just, it's easy to talk about diversity and ethnicity and where we're going. It is really, really hard to sustain it, and you have to be committed to it, which we are, and we're starting to see some success, and I think we're going to see those numbers grow in terms of fair representation across our department. I think that's something that's going to happen in the future, and I'm really proud of the EMS Academy, and I'm proud of the webinar and the work that our folks are doing along with, and that wouldn't have been even possible without the cooperation of Local 82 with Mark and Joe and the leadership of Local 82. We got a very solid labor management committee group, and we work very well together on some of these issues, so it makes it a lot easier when everybody's pushing a rock, so to speak, because otherwise it gets to be very, very challenging. And the last slide we had here was the community risk reduction and community outreach. Again, I've talked about this before. Captain Cassidy Anderson is my officer in charge of that. It is a division of 1. When you saw some of the numbers, she touched base with 17,000 individuals this year, including businesses and schools and classrooms, and has done a very, very effective job. When we talk about meeting adults, we are really talking about some of the vulnerable adults we have in the city. The community risk reduction and educational programs, it actually starts in the gleaming high rises down here that we have downtown down to Hope Harbor. We go and we visit everyone, and we talk to them. We spread the community education piece and trying to reach out as best we can to these individuals to provide the assistance they need, especially when it comes to terms of fire safety. We've done an effective job partnering with the Red Cross and free home smoke detectors and CO detectors being installed in houses. One of the unique things in Minneapolis, because of the rental units we have, we'll have people volunteering and want to have a smoke detector or a CO detector installed. We'll get to the residents, knock on the door, and they won't answer. I think they're afraid of what's coming in behind, the firefighters, and they're always worried about that. So it's a challenging piece that Cassidy works on to get in those doors and to provide the assistance that those folks need. And I am absolutely open to any questions that you might have.
Thank you. I don't see any questions in queue. Any thoughts or questions from here? No? Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief. I just wanted to hear a little bit about the the Explorers program that you have. If you could talk about that and how that's connecting to creating a pathway, where it's at, what it does, and how it's connecting to help create a more diverse workforce in the fire department.
Okay. I'll wind back a little farther. It probably even goes with our EMR program at Roosevelt High School. So it goes from Roosevelt High School EMR program into Fire Explorers, which are they meet regularly at our tower. They have a real experience of firefighting. They competed at the state fair this year against other Explorer groups with auto extrication and stuff. And it's really unique to see some of these kids start to change. If you create an opportunity, it's amazing the difference you can make in a small way. So we've got a lot of young folks in that program, and I would hope that I would like to see, number one, to see some out of the Explorers into our EMS Academy. And then EMS Academy I'm sorry? And we have one already but I'd like to continue that wheel. I really wanted to grow my own firefighters. That's what I've tried to do I started this is what I want to do is grow my own firefighters right from inside Minneapolis. They don't need to come from it. We're good. We can grow our own right here in this city. We are really prosperous. So, and that's really what I wanted to do. So we already have one, and there will be some more. It's become a very popular program. You know, we always have to limit the numbers, which is a little bit challenging because you don't want to do that. You know, it's there, and you always worry about limiting the number. But it's been effective. It's been a great investment. And if you ever get a chance, want to come out and see them, they would love to show off their skills. I know that it's fun to watch those young kids, especially in those big boots that don't fit very well. You know, so.
I hung out at one of the fire stations,
Yeah.
and I looked like one of the kids in a boots that don't fit quite right. So thank you so much, and thank you to my colleagues.
Chief, thank you for your time. Would you just do us the pleasure of introducing the staff?
I would love to. Starting from your left is my EMS coordinator, Amber Lage, and I have Deputy Chief of Engineering, my buddy Timmy. And then I've got actually Brian down here, and I got Melanie Rucker, and they do a wonderful job for me. And we couldn't move the rock without them. I know that they're just a very effective team. So I really appreciate all the work they do, and they know that. So, thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you to my colleagues for spending a little extra time today than we'd originally planned. This has been great. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome.
With our business done for today, we are adjourned.
Awesome. Thank you.